This is Ruth. There's a smell that gets into the walls of a place when you've loved it long enough. It's not just the scent of sugar and yeast, of cinnamon and rising bread, though God knows my bakery is full of that. It's the smell of time itself, of hard work, of 1,000 mornings that started in the deep, dark quiet before the sun even thought about rising. This bakery, the rising dough, it's more than a business to me. It's my life, pressed into the shape of a building, baked golden brown at 375 degrees. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. And I truly believed with every fiber of my being, that it would be my son's life too. His name is Michael. My Michael. The one who used to fall asleep in a laundry basket behind the counter, lulled by the hum of the industrial mixer. The boy whose small, flour-dusted hands would press chocolate chips into cookie dough with a seriousness that could make a general proud. I raised him here, in this temple of butter and warmth. After his father, my David, was taken from us so cruelly and so early by that wretched cancer, this bakery became our whole world. It was our provider, our protector, our therapy. When the grief for David felt like a physical weight on my chest, so heavy I could barely breathe, the simple, repetitive act of kneading dough would somehow knead my own soul back into a shape that could bear the day. I remember one such morning. Michael couldn't have been more than 7. I was fighting tears, my vision blurring as I weighed out the flour. He came up beside me, so quiet in his little socked feet, and wrapped his arms around my waist, pressing his face into my apron. "Don't cry, Mommy," he'd whispered, his voice small and sure. "The dough can taste your tears. It'll make the bread sad." I'd laughed through the sob caught in my throat, wiping my face with a floury hand. "Is that so, my little baker?" He'd looked up at me, his eyes, David's eyes, wide and earnest. "Yes, sad bread won't sell. And we have to be strong. For the bakery. For the bakery." He understood. Even then. Or so I thought. He saw it as I did, not just a shop but a legacy. A living, breathing thing we were building together. David and I had started it with a second-hand oven and a prayer. After he was gone, every brick I added, every new recipe I perfected, felt like a monument to his love, to our dream. And I was building it all for Michael. The bell above the door jingled, pulling me from my memories. It was a Tuesday, slow and sweet, the afternoon sun slanting through the front window and lighting up the dust motes dancing in the air. "Ruth? You in here, or have you finally been kidnapped by a band of marauding sourdough starters?" That voice, like warm honey and gravel, could only belong to my Auntie Grace. She swept in, a whirlwind of colorful scarves and jangling bracelets, her arms laden with grocery bags. "I brought you oranges. And gossip, the good kind, from the community center. Brenda Higgins' daughter is seeing the yoga instructor, and let me tell you, the man can't touch his toes. It's a scandal." I laughed, wiping my hands on my apron. "Grace, you're a menace. What did Brenda ever do to you?" "She bought the last decent avocado at the market last week. This is war." She started unpacking the oranges onto the counter, their bright, citrusy scent cutting through the bakery's sweet air. "So, where's the prodigal son? I thought he was helping you with the new supplier today." "He's on his way," I said, a familiar, warm pride swelling in my chest. "He had a meeting with Chloe this morning." Auntie Grace's hands stilled for a fraction of a second on an orange. Just a fraction. "Ah, the lovely Chloe. Don't start, Grace." "I didn't say a word," she protested, but her eyes were twinkling with unsaid words. "She's just very polished, isn't she? For a girl of 28. Sometimes when she talks all about market analytics and brand synergy, I feel like I need a university degree just to offer her a cup of tea. She's ambitious. It's good for Michael. He needs someone who pushes him." I heard the defensiveness in my own voice and hated it. Chloe was fine. She was a beautiful, sharp, intelligent young woman from a good family, as my own mother would have said. She wore blazers like armor and spoke in PowerPoint presentations. Michael had met her at a business networking event 6 months ago, and he'd been smitten. She represented a world he was desperate to be a part of, a world of sleek offices and stock portfolios, a world far removed from the humble, flower-dusted world of his childhood. "He needs someone who sees the heart of him," Grace said softly, her meaning clear. She thought Chloe only saw the potential of him, the son of a successful small business owner. Before I could reply, the door chimed again, and there he was, my Michael. At 25, he was the very image of his father, the same dark, curly hair, the same strong jaw, the same way of filling a doorway with his presence. But his eyes, which used to sparkle with mischief and warmth, now often held a new calculating light. A light I suspected was a reflection of Chloe's. "Mom, Auntie Grace." He came over and gave me a quick, dutiful kiss on the cheek. He smelled of expensive cologne and coffee, not of flour and sugar anymore. "Michael, my love, you look handsome. How was your meeting?" Grace enveloped him in one of her scented boa constrictor hugs. "Productive," he said, extracting himself with a smooth smile. "Very productive. Chloe's father has some incredible connections. He was looking over the bakery's books last night. Thanks for sending those over, Mom, and he had some brilliant ideas." A cold little trickle of unease ran down my spine. I'd sent Michael the financials because he'd said he wanted to understand the business better, to take more off my plate. He hadn't mentioned sharing them with his future father-in-law, a man I'd met exactly twice, who shook hands like he was assessing the quality of your bones. "Oh?" I kept my voice light, turning to slide a tray of cooled apple tarts into the display case. "What kind of ideas?" "Well, for starters, he's horrified by our profit margins." Michael said it so casually, as if stating a simple, undeniable fact. "He says we're leaving tens of thousands on the table every year. Our branding is quaint, but it doesn't scream premium. We could be charging double for the artisanal loaves. Triple, even." "Double?" Grace snorted. "Mrs. Gable would have a coronary. She's been buying her seeded rye here since the day we opened." "Exactly," Michael said, and there was a new, hard edge to his voice. "We're catering to a dying demographic, Auntie Grace. Chloe's father thinks, and I agree, that we need to pivot. Modernize. This neighborhood is gentrifying. We could be the next big thing. A destination bakery." I looked around my shop, my home. At the slightly worn wooden floors, the comfortable, mismatched chairs, the framed, faded drawings Michael had made in grade school that still hung behind the counter. "A destination bakery." I repeated, the words feeling foreign and cold on my tongue. "Think about it, Mom," Michael said, his eyes alight with a fervor that used to be reserved for my stories about his father. "We could expand. Open a franchise. This location is a goldmine of real estate. We could even sell the property to a developer for a fortune and rebuild something sleek, with a minimalist aesthetic. Glass and steel." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Sell the property. This land, this building, it was the ground David and I had stood on, broke and hopeful, imagining our future. It was the soil where I had buried my grief and grown a life for my son." "Michael," I said, my voice barely a whisper. This is us. This is the bakery." He looked at me then, and for a fleeting second, I saw my little boy again, the one who worried about sad bread. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the impatient gaze of a young man on the make. "I know, Mom, and it's a great foundation. But you have to think bigger. This isn't just a bakery anymore. It's an asset, and assets need to be managed to grow." He patted my shoulder, a condescending gesture that felt like a physical blow. "Don't worry your head about it. I'll handle the details. You just keep doing what you do best, baking." He smiled, a wide, bright, empty smile. "It's all for you, Mom. For our future. I want you to be able to retire, relax, travel. You've worked so hard, you deserve it." And that was the hook, you see? The beautifully baited hook. He knew exactly what to say. He framed his ambition as love, his greed as care for me. He made my life's work sound like a burden from which he needed to free me. He headed into the back office, already typing on his phone, no doubt reporting back to Chloe. Auntie Grace was silent for a long moment, watching me. The air, usually so full of warmth and sweetness, felt thin and cold. "Ruth," she finally said, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Your hands are shaking." I looked down. She was right. My hands, which could shape 100 perfect baguettes before dawn without a tremble, were trembling. "He's just excited, Grace," I said, trying to convince myself. "He's young. He sees opportunities. He sees dollar signs." A new voice cut in, sharp and clear as a shard of glass. We both turned. Standing in the doorway to the kitchen was Auntie Clara. I hadn't even heard her come in. Clara, Grace's older sister, was a woman who believed that sugar was a necessary evil and that kindness was often a weakness. She was tall, stern, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes missing nothing. "Clara," Grace sighed. "Don't start." "Someone has to," Clara said, her gaze fixed on me. She walked over, her posture ramrod straight. "I heard him. Don't worry your head about it. He spoke to you like you were a simpleton. Like you were the hired help." "He didn't mean it like that," I protested, but the words sounded weak, even to me. "Didn't he?" Clara's eyes were like flint. "Ruth, you built this with your own 2 hands. You carried this place on your back while carrying that boy on your hip. You are not a simpleton, you are a titan. And that boy, and that spreadsheet he's dating, they are circling you like vultures. That's my son you're talking about." I snapped, a flare of maternal fire burning through my confusion. "Yes," Clara said, not flinching. "He is your son. And a son can break his mother's heart in ways a stranger never could. I've seen it before. It starts with suggestions. Then it becomes managing your interests. Then one day, you're signing papers you don't understand, and you find the locks have been changed." "You're being dramatic," I said, turning my back to them, busying myself with arranging tarts that were already perfectly arranged. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Clara was just being her usual, cynical self. She'd never had children. She didn't understand the bond. "The faith. Am I?" Clara said softly. Then I heard her footsteps retreating into the kitchen. Grace came and stood beside me, leaning her hip against the counter. She didn't speak for a while, just let the silence sit between us, a comfortable, familiar blanket. "You know," she said finally, her voice soft. "The oranges. The reason I really bought them. I was going to ask you to teach me how to make your orange almond cake. The one with the crackly top, David's favorite." The mention of Flame 7 as one day. David's name was a punch to the gut, sweet and sorrowful all at once. "I remember the first time you made it for him," Grace continued, a smile in her voice. "You were so nervous. You said, 'Grace, what if it's too bitter? What if the almonds are too coarse?' I smiled too, remembering. And you told me, I told you," Grace said, slipping her arm through mine, "that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. The bitter notes make the sweet taste sweeter. The coarse texture gives it character." David took one bite, and his eyes, oh, his eyes. He didn't see a perfect cake. He saw your heart, and he loved it. Tears welled in my eyes. I leaned my head against hers. "This bakery is your orange almond cake, Ruth," she whispered. "It's real. It has cracks and coarse bits and bitter notes that make the sweet parts sing. Don't let anyone convince you to replace it with some bland, mass-produced, minimalist sponge, no matter who they are." I looked out the window, watching the people walk by, Mrs. Gable with her little dog, old Mr. Henderson on his daily stroll. They were my community, my family. This bakery was my heart, baked in a pan. And for the first time, a cold, sharp fear began to bloom in the warm, safe center of my world. A fear that the son I had raised, the boy I would have laid down my life for, no longer saw my heart. All he saw was the asset. And an asset, I knew, was just another word for something to be used. The human heart has a limitless capacity for hope, and a mother's heart, I think, has the most of all. It's a stubborn organ, always trying to find the melody in the dissonance. In the weeks that followed Michael's Destination Bakery speech, my heart worked overtime composing symphonies of justification. "He's driven," it would whisper to me in the quiet of the night. "Isn't that what you wanted? A son who isn't afraid of hard work? Or, he's trying to impress Chloe, to build a future. It's a phase. He'll remember who he is." I clung to these thoughts like a life raft. I focused on the good, the sweet moments, and tried to ignore the subtle, sour notes that Clara, with her predator's instinct, had detected immediately. It was a Friday evening, and the bakery was closed, the warm, yeasty silence a balm after the day's cheerful chaos. Michael had asked me to have dinner with him and Chloe at a new, fashionable restaurant downtown. A proper dinner, Mom. Somewhere we can talk without flour falling into our soup. So here I was, sitting in a place where the lighting was so low I needed my phone's flashlight to read the menu. And the plates were so large and the food so artfully arranged it looked more like a museum installation than a meal. I felt out of place in my simple, comfortable dress, a world away from my familiar apron. Chloe was holding court. She was dazzling, I'll give her that. She wore a sleek, black dress that probably cost more than my monthly oven repair budget, and her blonde hair was a perfect, smooth sheet. She was explaining the concept of disruptive innovation to me, using our bakery as a hypothetical case study. "You see, Ruth," she said, leaning forward, her eyes intense. "The rising dough is a classic example of an untapped market leader in a legacy space. The brand equity is phenomenal. But the operational model is, well, it's antiquated." She said antiquated, the way someone might say, infested. Michael beamed at her, his admiration plain on his face. "Isn't she brilliant, Mom? She's been doing a full analysis." "I see," I said, taking a small sip of water that tasted of cucumber and regret. "And what does this disruption involve, exactly?" "A complete rebrand," Chloe said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The name is cute, but it lacks sophistication. We're thinking Levanter. It's a wind that rises in the fame Mediterranean. It evokes artisanal European craftsmanship." "Levanter?" I repeated, the word feeling strange and clumsy in my mouth. "But we're a bakery in Ohio. Our artisanal European craftsmanship involves me getting up at 3 a.m. to make sure the sourdough starter hasn't gone rogue." Michael's smile tightened at the edges. "Mom, that's the kind of folksy anecdote we can use in the marketing, but the name itself has to have aspirational quality." "Aspirational," I echoed, feeling like I was in a foreign language class. "Exactly," Chloe jumped in. "Then, the product line, we streamline. Cut the low-margin items, the simple cookies, the basic loaves for the local customers." She waved a dismissive hand. "We focus on high-end, experiential goods. Deconstructed tarts. Bespoke celebration cakes that start at $500. We'll have a subscription model for curated pastry boxes." I felt a little dizzy. What about Mrs. Gable and her seeded rye? What about the kids who come in after school for a $2 cookie? Chloe gave a light, tinkling laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Ruth, you can't be sentimental in business. You have to follow the profit. Those customers don't align with the Levanter demographic." "I'm not running a business," I wanted to scream. "I'm running a community center that smells like heaven." But I stayed silent. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want to embarrass Michael. The waiter came and went with our orders. The conversation shifted to their wedding plans. It was going to be a massive, lavish affair. Chloe's parents were footing most of the bill, but Michael had insisted on contributing a significant amount. "It's only right, Mom," he'd told me when he first brought it up. "I need to show them I can provide for their daughter. That I'm a serious partner." Now, over dessert, a sphere of chocolate that you had to crack open with a tiny hammer to reveal a berry mousse inside. Chloe brought up the topic of a prenuptial agreement. "Daddy is absolutely insisting," she said, not looking the least bit uncomfortable. It's just standard practice for families like ours. It protects both parties. Of course, Michael said smoothly, reaching for her hand. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. It's smart, I've already spoken to my lawyer about it. I nearly choked on my deconstructed chocolate sphere. Your lawyer, Michael, since when do you have a lawyer? He looked at me as if I'd asked him since when he had a pair of shoes. Everyone has a lawyer, Mom. It's adulthood. Speaking of which, he took a sip of his wine, a move that felt rehearsed. The lawyer was looking over the bakery's corporate structure. It's a mess. You're still set up as a simple sole proprietorship from the 90 seconds. You have zero liability protection. I've managed just fine for 30 years, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. But you shouldn't have to manage, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. You should be protected. Chloe's father knows a fantastic corporate attorney. He specializes in small business optimization. He can set us up with a proper LLC. It would make you a salaried employee, protect your personal assets. It's just a smarter way to run things. The word us echoed in my head. Set us up. I'll think about it, I said, my appetite gone. Mom, there's nothing to think about, Michael said, a note of impatience creeping into his voice. It's a no-brainer. It's for your own good. I can't have you being vulnerable. I've never felt vulnerable a day in my life until right now, sitting across from you, I thought, but the words stayed trapped behind my teeth. The ride home was quiet. Michael dropped me off, his goodnight kiss perfunctory. Think about the LLC, Mom. Seriously. I stood on my porch, watching his taillights disappear into the night. The house felt too big, too empty. I wandered into the kitchen, not turning on the lights, and sat at the old oak table David and I had found at a flea market. I ran my hand over its scarred surface, remembering the countless meals, the homework sessions, the late-night talks we'd had here. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was the family group chat with Grace and Clara. A picture from Grace, a glorious, lopsided, slightly burnt orange almond cake. The caption, my first attempt, it tastes like love and arson. Clara said it has character. I think that's her version of a compliment. I smiled, a real smile for the first time all evening. Then another text came through, this one from Clara, sent only to me. Call me when you get home. I didn't question it. I dialed her number. She answered on the first ring. Well? I didn't have to ask what she meant. The story tumbled out of me in a hushed, pained rush, the disruptive innovation, the levanter, the lawyer, the prenup, the way Michael had looked at me when I'd questioned him. Clara listened without a single interruption. When I was finished, there was a long, heavy silence. Ruth, she said finally, her voice low and serious. You need to listen to me now. This is not about a new business model. This is a takeover. A takeover by my own son? Yes, they are isolating you. They are reframing your life's work as a problem that only they can solve. They are creating a sense of crisis liability, vulnerability to make you compliant. The LLC is the first step. They will put your assets into a corporate structure they control. They will make you a salaried employee, which means they can eventually fire you. Have you given him any power of attorney? Any signing authority? My blood ran cold. A limited one, for the business account, so he could help with ordering supplies when I had that bout of sciatica last year. I could almost hear Clara's sharp intake of breath. Revoke it, tomorrow. Clara, I can't just, he's my son. How would that look? How would I even explain it? You don't explain it, she said, her voice cracking like a whip. You are the mother. You are the business owner. You go to the bank, and you revoke it. You tell him the sciatica is better. You tell him you joined a yoga class. You tell him anything, but you get his name off your accounts. You're asking me to treat my son like a criminal. I am asking you to see him for what he is right now, a threat. He is being guided by that girl and her family. They see a successful, self-made woman with a valuable business and a soft heart. They are exploiting that heart. It is the oldest story in the book. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. He loves me, Clara. I know he does. Her voice softened, just a fraction. I am sure he does in his way. But love can be a fuzzy, distant thing when ambition and greed are shouting in your ear. Right now the shouting is all he can hear. You need to build a wall to protect yourself, Ruth. Not to shut him out forever, but to force him to remember how to speak in a normal tone. To remember who you are. And more importantly, to remember who he is. We hung up soon after. I sat in the dark for a long time. I thought about the little boy in the laundry basket. I thought about the man in the restaurant, talking about demographic alignment. They seemed like two different people. The next morning, I went to the bakery early. The pre-dawn darkness was my friend, a quiet blanket that soothed my ragged nerves. I went through the motions, the sacred rituals of my day, feeding the starter, scaling the ingredients, mixing the dough. The physicality of it grounded me. As the first loaves were proofing, I sat down at my old, flour-dusted desk in the back office. I pulled out the file with the bank documents. There it was, the signature authority form, giving Michael limited access to the business operating account. I had signed it with such pride, such a feeling of relief. My boy is stepping up. My hand trembled as I picked up the phone. I dialed the number for my banker, a man named Frank who had been with me almost as long as the bakery itself. Frank, it's Ruth, from the Rising Dough. Yes, I'm fine. Frank, I need to revoke the signing authority for Michael, effective immediately. No problem between us. Just a mother wanting to keep a handle on her own purse strings, you know how it is. I forced a laugh, and it sounded brittle and fake even to my own ears. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Of course, Ruth, Frank said, his tone carefully neutral. I'll take care of it this morning. You'll need to come in and sign the new forms. I thanked him and hung up. The deed was done. I had built the first brick in Clara's wall. And it felt like I had just hammered a nail into my own heart. I didn't know it then, but that simple phone call was the first quiet shot in a war I never knew was coming. A war for my legacy, for my home, for the very soul of the life I had built. And the enemy was the person I loved most in the world. They say a watched pot never boils, but I tell you, a watched life, one you're afraid is about to curdle, seems to sour in fast motion. The weeks after I revoked Michael's bank authority were some of the most tense of my life. I felt like I was walking through my own home on a floor made of eggshells, terrified that the next step would be the one to shatter everything. I waited for the explosion. I braced for the phone call. The confrontation, the hurt and angry demand to know why I didn't trust him. But it never came. That was the first sign that Clara was right, that this was a calculated play, and not just a son's enthusiastic bumbling. A normal person, a son operating in good faith, would have been hurt, confused, asked questions. Michael said nothing. It was a silence more deafening than any argument. Instead, the strategy shifted. The direct assault on the business structure was replaced by a slow, insidious campaign of erosion. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, and each tiny cut was designed to make me feel old, out of touch, and foolish. It started on a Sunday, his usual day for dinner with me. He arrived without Chloe, which was a small mercy, but he carried a new tablet computer, its sleek black surface looking alien and ominous on my checkered kitchen tablecloth. "Mom," he said, after pushing my pot roast around his plate with a distinct lack of enthusiasm. "We need to talk about your digital footprint, or, more accurately, your complete lack of one." I sighed, putting my fork down. "Michael, if this is about the Levanter again..." "It's about survival, Mom," he said, his voice patient in a way that felt deliberately condescending. He turned the tablet around. On it was a rudimentary website for the bakery, one I'd paid a neighborhood kid $50 to build a decade ago. "Look at this. It's not mobile responsive. The booking system for your classes is clunky. there are 3 reviews from last month you haven't responded to. One of them is a 1-star review from someone named BreadLover42 who says the sourdough was too sour. He said it with such gravity, as if BreadLover42 had just delivered a fatal blow to our entire enterprise. Well, I said, trying to keep my voice light, sourdough is supposed to be sour. That's the point. And I've been busy baking the bread, not talking about it on the computer. That's the problem, he said, tapping the screen for emphasis. You're living in the physical world, Mom. The real world is online. Chloe ran a full digital audit. Your social media presence is negligible. You're not leveraging influencer marketing. You're not using targeted ads. You're invisible to the entire millennial and Gen Z demographic. You're a ghost. I looked at him, at my son, who had once built forts out of flour sacks, now talking to me about leveraging influencer marketing. A cold dread settled in my stomach. He wasn't just suggesting changes, he was telling me that the world I lived in, the tangible, real world of dough and ovens and the smiling faces of my customers, was no longer the real world. I don't want to be a ghost, Michael, I said quietly. I want to be a baker. It's not enough, he replied, and there was a finality in his tone that chilled me. Look, I've taken the liberty of drafting a new digital strategy. Chloe has a friend who's a whiz at this stuff. She can build us a new site, manage the socials, the whole thing. We'll get you on Bread Talk or whatever it's called. It's an investment, but it's essential. An investment? I asked, my guard going up. How much of an investment? He waved a dismissive hand. Don't worry about the cost. We can cover it from the business account, and just consider it a necessary operational expense. And there it was. The hook? The reason for the silence about the bank account. He was finding another way in. I'll need to see a quote, Michael. I said, my voice firmer than I felt. A detailed one. And I'll decide if it's a necessary expense. His face tightened. The patient mask slipped for just a second, and I saw a flash of pure frustration. Mom, you don't understand this world. You can't make an informed decision about something you don't understand. You have to trust the people who do. It was the same song, second verse. You're not smart enough. Let me handle it. I understand a budget, I said, holding his gaze. I understand profit and loss. Bring me the numbers, and I'll understand just fine. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw him recalculating. The direct route was blocked. He picked up his tablet, the screen going black. Fine, he said, the word clipped and cold. I'll have Chloe's friend put a proposal together. He left soon after, his dinner, mostly uneaten. I looked at his plate, at the perfectly good food gone to waste, and it felt like a metaphor for everything. He had lost his taste for the simple, nourishing things I provided. He only had an appetite for something I couldn't quite name, something sleek and expensive and ultimately unsatisfying. The next skirmish came from an unexpected direction, my home. I'd lived in the same cozy, slightly cluttered 3-bedroom house since David and I bought it. It was full of memories, the mark on the doorframe where we'd measured Michael's height every birthday, the faint stain on the living room carpet from when he'd spilled grape juice during his 6th birthday party, the backyard where David had pushed him on a swing until they were both breathless with laughter. One evening, Chloe came by, unannounced. She carried a binder. I had come to dread that binder. Ruth, she said, air-kissing my cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. I was in the neighborhood, and I just had to show you this. She led me to the living room as if she were the hostess and I were the guest, opening her binder on the coffee table. Inside were glossy printouts of minimalist living rooms, all neutral tones and stark furniture. Michael and I were talking, and we are just so worried about you in this big, old house. All these stairs. The maintenance must be a nightmare. I manage just fine, I said, my hand instinctively going to the worn fabric of my armchair. Of course you do, she said, her tone implying the exact opposite, but you shouldn't have to. Look at this. She pointed to a picture of a sleek, modern apartment. This is in the new Verve building downtown. It's a senior living adjacent community. So many amenities. A pool, a gym, social coordinators, all the upkeep is handled. You'd be with people your own age. You could lock the door and travel, without a single worry about the gutters or the roof. I felt the blood drain from my face. Senior living adjacent. People your own age. She was packaging me for retirement, for obsolescence. She was seeing my home, the sanctuary that held every memory of my family, as a problem to be solved. A piece of real estate to be liquidated. "Chloe," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and rage. "This is my home. David and I bought this house. Michael grew up here. I have no intention of leaving." She gave me a pitying smile. "Ruth, I know change is hard, but think of the equity you have tied up here. This neighborhood has skyrocketed. You could sell this place, buy that lovely apartment with cash, and have a significant nest egg left over. It's just smart financial planning. Michael is so concerned about your future security." And there it was again, framed as concern, wrapped in the language of love and security. But all I heard was, "Your usefulness here is over. It's time to cash out and get out of the way." I stood up, my legs feeling weak. "Thank you for the suggestion, Chloe, but my answer is no." She didn't look offended. She looked strategic, like a chess player who had anticipated the move and was already planning the next 10. "Just think about it," she said, closing her binder with a snap. "No pressure." After she left, I wandered through the rooms of my house. I trailed my fingers over the faded wallpaper in Michael's old room, now a guest room divided by sewing room. I looked at the pictures on the mantelpiece. David, young and vibrant, his arm around me. Michael, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a lopsided clay pot he'd made for me. This wasn't just equity. This was my life, and they saw it as a piggy bank. The final straw, the one that broke the back of my denial, was smaller still. It was about the almond cake. I was teaching Auntie Grace how to make it properly. The kitchen was a beautiful mess, full of the scent of toasted almonds and zested oranges. We were laughing, flour in our hair, as Grace attempted to fold the egg whites, without deflating them. "The recipe says gentle folds, Grace, not Mortal Kombat," I teased her. "I'm being gentle," she protested, her face a picture of concentration. "It's these brute hands of mine. They're better for digging in the garden than for this delicate work." The back door opened and Michael walked in. He stopped short, taking in the scene. His eyes scanned the countertops covered in bowls, the open bags of flour, the eggshells in a bowl. He didn't smile. He looked disgusted. "Mom, what is all this?" he asked. "It's a mess, is what it is." I laughed, trying to draw him into our joy. "We're making your father's favorite cake." He shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. "You're using all that processed sugar? And real butter? Mom, do you have any idea how bad that is for your brand? If we're going to position Levanter as a premium health-conscious brand, we need to be using alternative sweeteners, avocado oil. This home ec project is a liability." The room went silent. The laughter died in my throat. Grace stood frozen, her spatula hovering over the bowl. He was no longer just attacking my business or my home. He was attacking my food. The food I had made for him his entire life. The food that was love and memory and comfort. He was calling the memory of his father's favorite cake a liability. I looked at him, truly looked at him. The boy was gone. Completely. In his place was this stranger, this corporate drone who saw the world only in terms of brand positioning and liability. The last fragile thread of my hope snapped. "Get out, Michael," I said, my voice low and steady, though my whole body was shaking. He blinked, startled. "What?" "Get out of my kitchen," I repeated, each word clear and sharp as a knife. "This home ec project is my home, and you are no longer welcome to come in here and insult it. Or me." For a moment, he looked genuinely shocked. Then his face hardened. "Fine. I can see you're not in a rational state of mind. We'll talk when you've calmed down." He turned and left, the back door closing with a soft, definitive click. The silence he left behind was heavy and awful. Grace slowly put the spatula down. She came over to me and, without a word, put her flowery arms around me. I didn't cry. I was too empty for tears. The well of my hope had finally run dry. "He's gone, Grace," I whispered into her shoulder. "My boy is gone." She held me tighter. "No, honey," she murmured. "He's just lost." "But you, Ruth, you just found yourself. You found your line. And my God, it was a beautiful thing to watch you draw it." That night, I didn't call Clara. I didn't need to. I knew what she would say. She would say, "It's about time." I sat at David's old desk and I pulled out a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote a single sentence: "What do I want?" Not what Michael wanted for me. Not what Chloe wanted from me. What I wanted. It was a terrifying question. I hadn't asked it of myself in years. I was a mother, a baker, a widow. My wants had always been secondary to my duties. But now, my duty was to my own survival. I picked up the phone. I didn't call my usual lawyer, the kind, elderly man who handled my will. I called the number Clara had pressed into my hand weeks ago, the one for a woman named Eleanor Vance, who Clara had described as a shark in pearls, specializing in fiduciary law and financial exploitation. The phone rang twice. Eleanor Vance, a crisp, no-nonsense voice answered. I took a deep breath, my voice firm, for the first time in months. "Miss Vance, my name is Ruth Miller. My son is trying to take my business and my home from me. I need your help." On the other end of the line, there was a slight pause, and then a sound that was almost a smile. "Ruth Miller," she said. "I've been expecting your call. Tell me everything." And I did. Walking into Eleanor Vance's office felt like stepping onto another planet, a planet where everything was cool, calm, and ruthlessly efficient. There were no warm, flour-dusted surfaces here. Just sleek glass, polished chrome, and a view of the city that made you feel small and significant all at once. The air didn't smell of sugar and yeast. It smelled of lemon polish and quiet, unshakable power. I dressed carefully, not in my usual comfortable slacks and soft sweater, but in the single, sharp blazer and tailored trousers I owned, saved for funerals and the occasional wedding. I felt like an imposter, a baker playing dress-up as a businesswoman, but Clara had insisted. "You walk in there looking like somebody's sweet grandma, and that's how she'll treat you. You walk in there like the titan you are, and she'll pick up her sword for you." Eleanor Vance herself was exactly as Clara had described, a shark in pearls. She was probably in her late 50s, with a sleek, silver bob that looked as if it had been cut with a laser, and she wore a simple, exquisitely cut navy dress. The pearls at her ears and throat were real, and they had the soft, heavy glow of things that have been passed down through generations. But her eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they held an intelligence that was both intimidating and deeply reassuring. She stood and came around her desk, offering a hand. Her handshake was firm, dry, and brief. "Ruth Miller, please, sit." She gestured to a low-slung leather chair that was surprisingly comfortable. "Clara speaks very highly of you. She says you built an empire from flour and fire." I managed a weak smile. "I don't know about an empire. It's a bakery." "Empires come in all sizes," she said, returning to her seat and steepling her fingers. "The principle is the same. You built something of value that others now wish to possess. Tell me. From the beginning." And so, I did. I started with David, with the dream of the rising dough. I told her about Michael sleeping in the laundry basket, about the grief that kneaded itself into the dough, about the pride I felt watching him grow up in that world of warmth. Then, I told her about Chloe, about the talk of disruptive innovation, and Levanter. I showed her the digital strategy proposal Michael had finally, grudgingly, provided a document full of jargon that proposed spending a quarter of my annual profits on a website and social media management. I told her about the push for the LLC, the dinner where my food was called a liability, and Chloe's binder full of retirement community brochures. I told her about revoking the bank authority and the chilling silence that followed. I told her about the final, awful conversation in my kitchen. I talked for what felt like an hour, my voice gaining strength as I laid out the whole, sorry tapestry of my betrayal. Eleanor Vance listened without a single interruption, her winter sky eyes fixed on me, absorbing every word. She didn't gasp or cluck her tongue in sympathy. She just absorbed. When I finished, my hands were clenched in my lap, my knuckles white. She was silent for a full minute, just looking at me. Then she leaned forward slightly. "First, Ruth, I need you to understand something," she said, her voice low and precise. "This is not a family dispute. This is a hostile takeover attempt. You are the CEO of a successful, privately held company. Your son, influenced by his fiancée and likely her family, is attempting a coup. They are using the classic playbook: isolate, undermine, and seize control. They are making you doubt your own competence so that you will willingly hand over the keys. Do you understand that?" Hearing it stated so bluntly, so clinically, was like a bucket of ice water. It stripped away the last vestiges of my sentimental denial. She was right. This was a corporate raid, and the raider was my own flesh and blood. "I understand," I said, my voice hoarse. "Good." She picked up a pristine, gold-plated pen. "Now, we move from defense to offense. You have already taken the first, most critical step. You revoked his financial access. That was brilliant. You have also refused to sign anything regarding a new corporate structure. Also brilliant. These are your shields. Now, we need a sword." "A sword?" I asked, the word feeling violent and foreign. "Metaphorically speaking," she said with a thin, sharp smile. "We need to know exactly what we're dealing with. I want you to go home and gather every single financial document, every bank statement, every tax return for the last 7 years. I want the bakery's records and your personal records. I need to see the flow of money. I also need you to write down a timeline of every significant interaction, every suggestion, every criticism, every helpful proposal Michael and Chloe have made. Dates, times, what was said. Memory is fallible, a contemporaneous record is not." She was talking about building a case against my son. The reality of it made me feel nauseous. What is the endgame here, Miss Vance?" "Eleanor, please." She put down her pen. "The endgame is your security and your autonomy. Ideally, we arm you with so much legal and financial armor that their attempts become futile and they give up. We make you an unappetizing target. We may need to send a cease and desist letter outlining their harassment and financial exploitation. That often shocks people back to their senses." "And if it doesn't?" I whispered. Her gaze was unwavering. "Then we escalate, but we cross that bridge if we come to it. Our immediate goal is fortification. You are the castle, Ruth. We are going to raise the drawbridge, boil the oil, and man the battlements. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of Michael's face as he called my cake a liability. I thought of Chloe's pitying smile. I thought of David and the life we'd built. I squared my shoulders and looked directly into those winter sky eyes. "Yes," I said, "I am." The next few days were a strange, out-of-body experience. I felt like a detective in my own life, rifling through filing cabinets and old boxes, pulling out the story of my financial history. It was a history of struggle and triumph. The lean years after David died, where the profit margins were so thin they were almost transparent. The years of slow, steady growth. The investment in the new, energy-efficient oven that had nearly bankrupted me but had paid for itself 100 times over. It was all there, in black and white and a lot of red that slowly turned to black. Sitting at my kitchen table that night, surrounded by piles of paper, I felt a strange sense of power. This wasn't just paperwork, this was the evidence of my life, my competence, my resilience. They thought I was a confused old woman who didn't understand the modern world. But these spreadsheets and ledgers were my world, and I understood them perfectly. I was so engrossed I didn't hear the back door open. Suddenly, Auntie Clara was there, holding a casserole dish covered in foil. Grace said, "You'd be neck-deep in tax returns." She sent lasagna. She placed the dish on the stove and then stood, her hands on her hips, surveying the organized chaos on my table. A slow, rare, genuine smile spread across her face. "Well, look at you, Ruth Miller, Field Marshal." "It feels grim," I admitted, rubbing my tired eyes. "It's not grim," Clara corrected, her voice firm. "It's necessary. You're not gathering weapons to attack him, Ruth. You're gathering the blueprints to your own fortress. You're reminding yourself of what you've built. That's your power, not his, yours." She was right, of course, she always was. Her words reframed the task, turning it from a sinister plot against my son into a sacred act of self-preservation. I finished the timeline, my hand cramping as I wrote down every hurtful word, every condescending pat on the shoulder, every suggestion that felt like a command. It was a painful, cathartic exercise. Seeing it all laid out on paper, the pattern was undeniable. It was a campaign. A cold, calculated, and deeply personal war of attrition. A week later, I was back in Eleanor Vance's office, this time with 2 heavy boxes of documents. Her associate, a young, whip-smart woman named Maya, took them away to be scanned and organized. Eleanor reviewed my timeline, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked up. "This is excellent. It paints a very clear picture. Now there's something else we need to discuss. Your will." "My will? I have a will. Everything goes to Michael." "Precisely," she said, her tone dry. "And that, right now, is a problem. It's the ultimate leverage. As long as he is your sole beneficiary, he has very little incentive to stop his current behavior. In fact, he has every incentive to continue. He can afford to wait you out." The implication hung in the air between us, ugly and cold. "You're suggesting I disinherit my son." The words felt like ash in my mouth. "I am suggesting you modify your estate plan to reflect the current reality of your relationship," she corrected gently but firmly. "It doesn't have to be permanent. Wills can be changed again. But right now, you need to send a message that his actions have consequences. You can create a trust, name new beneficiaries, charities, your sisters, a scholarship fund for aspiring bakers. The point is to remove the guaranteed payoff at the end of the rainbow." I felt dizzy. Changing my will felt like the most final, most unforgivable act. It was the legal equivalent of slamming a door and throwing away the key. I need to think about that," I stammered. "Of course," Eleanor said. "It's the heaviest artillery we have. We don't need to deploy it today, but you need to be prepared that it may become necessary." I left her office feeling more unsettled than when I'd arrived. Fortifying my business was one thing. Altering the fundamental legacy I had always planned for my child was another. It felt like a betrayal of my own deepest instincts as a mother. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went down to the kitchen and did what I always do when my mind is a tangled knot. I baked. I made David's orange almond cake. I zested the oranges until my knuckles were raw. I ground the almonds. I folded the egg whites with a gentleness I wished I could apply to my own heart. The familiar, comforting smells filled the house. When it was done, golden and crackly on top, I didn't cut a slice. I just sat at the table and looked at it, the whole, perfect thing. It was my love, made tangible. And I knew then what I had to do. Love wasn't about giving someone everything, even when they were trying to destroy you. Love was about holding the line. Love was about saying, "I brought you into this world, but I will not let you destroy my world." The next morning, I called Eleanor Vance. "Eleanor, it's Ruth. I've thought about it. Draw up the new documents. It's time to raise the drawbridge." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her sharp, approving smile. "Excellent," she said. I'll have Maya draft them immediately. And Ruth? Yes, welcome to the war room. I hung up the phone. My hand was steady. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I was resolved. The slow sour had stopped. The fight for the sweet had begun. There is a peculiar kind of calm that descends after you've made a decision that could break your heart. It's not peace, not really. It's more like the quiet in the eye of a hurricane, a temporary, eerie stillness where you know the storm is circling, waiting to slam into you with renewed fury, but for a moment, you can just breathe. Signing the new will and the trust documents in New West. Eleanor Vance's office was like that. My hand didn't shake. The pen felt heavy, a sculptor's tool carving a new, harder reality out of the soft clay of my old life. I wasn't disinheriting Michael completely. Eleanor had convinced me to place the bulk of the estate, the business, the house, the investments into a trust that would pay him a small, steady income unless and until a mediator, chosen by both of us, could certify a genuine and lasting reconciliation. It was a door left open, but a very heavy, very locked one. The rest, a not insignificant portion, was designated for a local culinary arts program for underprivileged kids, named for David. It felt right. It felt like my love was being redirected from a barren field to fertile soil. I didn't tell a soul. Not Grace, not even Clara. This secret was a cold, hard stone in my pocket, and I carried it with me everywhere. It was my armor and my shame. For a few weeks, the silence from Michael's camp was profound. No more binders, no more digital strategy talks, no more surprise visits. I started to wonder, with a desperate, foolish hope, if they had somehow sensed the shift in the wind and given up. Maybe my simple no had finally been understood. Maybe the fortress walls had held. The calm was shattered on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The bakery was quiet, the steady drum of rain on the roof a soothing rhythm. I was in the back, up to my elbows in a vat of cinnamon roll frosting, when the bell on the front door jingled. I wiped my hands on my apron, expecting Mrs. Gable for her weekly rye or a harried parent seeking a cookie bribe. But it wasn't Mrs. Gable, it was a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, dressed in a trench coat that shed water onto my clean floor, and he carried a slim, black leather briefcase. He had the impersonal, efficient air of someone who deals in paperwork, not people. "Can I help you?" I asked, my baker's smile feeling stiff on my face. "Are you Ruth Miller?" he asked, his voice neutral. "I am." "Ma'am, you've been served." He handed me a thick, legal-sized envelope. Then he turned and walked out, the door jingling cheerfully behind him, as if it had just facilitated the delivery of a birthday present and not a declaration of war. I stood there, frozen, the envelope, feeling like a live thing in my hands. The words, "Petition for Guardianship and Conservatorship," were printed on the front. I didn't fully understand the legalese, but I understood the gist. Someone was asking the court to declare me incompetent, to take away my right to make decisions about my own life, my own money, my own body. My hands began to shake, so violently I could barely tear the envelope open. I skimmed the pages, my vision blurring. The petitioner was Michael David Miller, my son. The documents were filled with lies, each one a tiny, precise dagger. It claimed I was showing signs of cognitive decline and financial imprudence. It cited my resistance to modern business practices and my isolation from family. It mentioned my erratic behavior, pointing to the question, revocation of his bank authority as proof of paranoia. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, twisting every one of my acts of self-preservation into symptoms of madness. The world tilted. I stumbled to a chair, the papers spilling from my hands onto the floor. I couldn't breathe. It felt like a physical blow to the chest. A guardianship. He wasn't just trying to take my business. He was trying to take me. He was trying to have me declared a child in the eyes of the law, with him as my parent. The bell jingled again. I looked up, tears of sheer panic and betrayal clouding my vision. It was Auntie Grace, her cheerful face collapsing into alarm the second she saw me. "Ruth, honey, what's wrong? What is all this?" She rushed over, gathering the papers from the floor. She scanned the first page, her face paling. Oh my dear Lord, no, he didn't. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, a low moan escaping my lips. Grace didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. Clara, get to the bakery. Now, it's an emergency. She hung up, came around the counter, and knelt in front of me, taking my icy hands in her warm ones. Listen to me, Ruth. Breathe. Just breathe. We are not going to let this happen. Do you hear me? We will fight this with everything we have. Within 10 minutes, Clara was there, her hair damp from the rain, her face a thundercloud. She took the petition from Grace, reading it with a grim, focused intensity. When she finished, she didn't gasp or cry. She carefully, deliberately, placed the papers on the counter. Then she looked at me, and her eyes were blazing with a cold, pure fire I had never seen before. The little bastard, she said, her voice low and deadly calm. He's gone for the nuclear option. What do we do? I whispered, feeling small and broken. We call your shark, Clara said, picking up my phone and thrusting it into my hands. Now. My fingers were so numb I could barely dial. When Eleanor Vance answered, I tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked sob. Ruth? What's happened? Clara took the phone from my trembling hands. Eleanor? It's Clara. He's filed for guardianship and conservatorship. We just got served. She listened for a moment, her jaw tight. Yes, we're at the bakery. Okay, we'll be there. She hung up and looked at me. She's canceling her afternoon. We're to go to her office immediately. She says to bring the petition and not to talk to anyone. Especially not Michael. The drive downtown was a blur of rain-smeared windows and the frantic beating of my own heart. Grace held my hand in the back seat while Clara drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, cutting through traffic with a terrifying efficiency. Back in Eleanor's office, the atmosphere was different. The cool, collected professionalism was gone, replaced by a buzzing, focused energy. Eleanor had the petition spread out on her desk, Maya by her side, both of them dissecting it line by line. This is aggressive, Eleanor said, without looking up. And sloppy. They're relying on stereotypes about aging and your emotional reaction. They didn't expect you to have counsel already. She finally looked at me, and her expression was almost pleased. This is a gift, Ruth. A gift? I croaked, incredulous. He's trying to have me declared insane. No, she corrected. He's showing his hand. He's desperate. A guardianship petition is a huge risk. The court looks at them very carefully. And now, we get to depose him. We get to subpoena his financial records, Chloe's, her father's. We get to force them, under oath, to justify these lies. She tapped the paper. He says you're financially imprudent. We will show the court 30 years of impeccable bookkeeping. He says you're isolated. We will parade a line of character witnesses from your community that stretches around the block. He says you're cognitively declining. She gave me that thin, sharp smile. We will have you evaluated by the top geriatric psychiatrist in the state, and you will dazzle them. Her confidence was a lifeline. I clung to it. What do we do first? Clara asked, her voice like steel. First, we file our response, vehemently objecting to this and requesting a dismissal. Then, we go on the attack. We'll subpoena Michael's personal bank accounts. I want to see if he's in debt. I want to see if there's a pattern of him living beyond his means. We'll subpoena the communications between him and Chloe about the bakery. I'll bet my pearls there's a treasure trove of arrogance in there. She turned to Maya. Get Dr. Evans on the phone, and I want a forensic accountant. Let's see how imprudent Ruth really is. It was like watching a master general deploy her troops. The fear began to recede, replaced by a simmering righteous anger. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I met with Dr. Evans, a kind, no-nonsense woman who put me through a battery of tests: memory, reasoning, problem-solving. At the end, She smiled. Ruth, based on these results, your cognitive function is in the top 5th percentile for your age. You're sharper than most of the law students I teach. I will be delighted to testify to that. The forensic accountant, a quiet man named Ben, took my boxes of documents and emerged 2 days later with a preliminary report. Mrs. Miller, he said, a note of respect in his voice. Your business is a model of financial health. Your debt-to-income ratio is excellent. Your personal savings are robust. There is not a single solitary example of imprudence here. If anything, you're overly conservative. Meanwhile, the community found out. News, especially ugly news, travels fast in a neighborhood like mine. But instead of the shame I feared, I was met with an outpouring of fury and support. Mrs. Gable came in, slamming her cane on the floor. That boy, I'll give him a piece of my mind. The nerve. Dozens of my customers, my friends, stopped by or called, offering to be character witnesses. The parent of the kid who bought the $2 cookies, a lawyer himself, offered to provide a pro bono affidavit about my stability and standing in the community. I was not isolated. I was embedded in a web of love and respect that Michael had never seen, because he no longer looked at my world as anything real. The day we discovered the motive was the day the war truly turned. Maya had subpoenaed Michael's financial records. She came into Eleanor's office, her face grim. You were right, Eleanor, she said, placing a spreadsheet on the desk. He's drowning. Credit card debt up to his eyeballs. He took out a massive personal loan 6 months ago. The payments are staggering. What for? I asked, my heart in my throat. The wedding, Maya said softly. The venue, the designer dress, the band, it's all here. And there's more. He and Chloe have put a non-refundable deposit on a luxury apartment in that new Verve building. The one Chloe showed you the brochures for. The purchase is contingent on his ability to secure a mortgage, which, given this debt, is highly unlikely unless... She trailed off. Unless he had access to a significant asset to use as collateral, Eleanor finished, her voice cold. Or unless he controlled that asset outright. It all clicked into place with a sickening finality. The lavish wedding, to impress her parents. The expensive apartment to maintain the facade. He had spent a fortune he didn't have to buy a life he couldn't afford. And my bakery, my home, were the only things valuable enough to cover his bets. The guardianship wasn't just about control. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort to stave off his own financial ruin. He was trying to sell my life to save his own. I thought I had known pain before. But this was a new depth. It wasn't just betrayal. It was being used as a commodity. A means to an end. My value to my son was now measured in square footage and debt relief. I left Eleanor's office that day and drove to the cemetery. I sat in the rain by David's headstone, the cold seeping through my coat. He's lost, David, I whispered, my tears mixing with the rain. Our boy is so lost. And I don't know how to find him in this man he's become. There was no answer, just the steady fall of rain on the grass. But as I sat there, a strange clarity washed over me. The grief was still there, a vast ocean of it, but the love I felt in that moment wasn't for the man trying to destroy me. It was for the little boy who was gone, and I knew, with a certainty, that, settled deep in my bones, that I had to fight for that little boy's mother. I had to protect the life his father had built for her. I stood up, my clothes soaked, my heart aching, but my spirit, for the first time, was utterly unbroken. The uninvited guest this legal nightmare had shown up on my doorstep, but it had also awakened the warrior inside me. The mother was grieving, but the titan was ready to fight. There is a certain power that comes from knowing your enemy's weakness. For weeks, I had been reeling, operating from a place of hurt and shock. But the discovery of Michael's debt, the sheer, naked desperation behind his actions, changed something fundamental in me. The monster under the bed was just a scared, foolish boy who had made a terrible, terrible mess. And while that didn't excuse a single one of his actions, it gave me a battlefield advantage. Panic makes you sloppy. And Michael was panicking. Eleanor Vance's office became our war room. The large, glass-top table was no longer a symbol of cold corporate power. It was a map of the coming confrontation, littered with legal pads, highlighted transcripts, and Ben, the forensic accountant's damning spreadsheets. The guardianship hearing is in 3 weeks, Eleanor stated, pacing slowly in front of us. Grace, Clara, and I were seated, a captive audience to her strategic genius. Our goal is not just to have the petition dismissed. Our goal is to have it dismissed with prejudice, and to so thoroughly humiliate Michael and his counsel that he will think twice before ever attempting something like this again. We will make an example of him. Clara gave a sharp, approving nod. Grace reached over and squeezed my hand. How do we do that? I asked, my voice steady. We weave a web, Eleanor said, stopping and placing her palms flat on the table. A web of truth so strong and so sticky that every lie he tells will only entangle him further. Ruth, you are the spider at the center. Calm, patient, and deadly. The metaphor was chilling, but it fit. I felt a new, strange sense of purpose settling over me. The first strands of the web were my own testimony. Eleanor and Maya spent hours with me, preparing me for the deposition and the hearing. They will try to provoke you, Eleanor warned, her eyes sharp. They will use condescending language. They will imply you are forgetful, emotional, unstable. You will not take the bait. You will be polite, articulate, and devastatingly precise. You are not a hysterical mother. You are a business owner defending her livelihood. Remember that. We practiced. Maya played the part of Michael's lawyer, her voice dripping with fake concern. Now, Mrs. Miller, isn't it true that you've been feeling overwhelmed lately? Perhaps forgetting orders, mixing up recipes. I took a slow, silent breath, just as Eleanor had taught me. No, that is not true. Our order error rate is 0.5%, which is well below the industry average. I have not mixed up a recipe in 30 years of business. And when you revoked your son's access to your accounts, you were acting out of paranoia, weren't you? A fear that people were out to get you? Another breath. I was acting on the legal advice of my counsel after recognizing a pattern of behavior aimed at seizing control of my assets. It was a prudent financial decision. Over and over, we drilled. They threw every ugly accusation from the petition at me, and I learned to bat them back with facts, not feelings. I was learning to translate the messy, painful language of the heart into the clean, unassailable language of the law. The next strand of the web was my community. A week before the hearing, Grace and Clara organized a meeting at the bakery after hours. The place was packed, not just with customers, but with my suppliers, the mailman, the woman who ran the flower shop next door, the parents from the school, even old Mr. Henderson, who just came for the free coffee and moral support. They filled every chair, leaned against the counters, their faces a sea of fierce loyalty. I stood before them, my apron still on, my heart swollen with a gratitude so profound it threatened to undo my hard-won composure. You all know why we're here, I began, my voice only trembling a little. My son, Michael, has taken me to court. He's told a judge that I'm not competent to run my own life, that I'm isolated from my community. I paused, looking out at the crowd. He could not be more wrong. A rumble of agreement went through the room. The lawyer says we need people to come to the hearing, Clara announced, her voice cutting through the murmur. We need to show the judge that Ruth is the backbone of this neighborhood, that she is loved, respected, and of sound mind and body. A forest of hands went up. I'll be there, count me in. I'll bring my whole book club. That boy needs a good talking to. Mrs. Gable stood up, leaning heavily on her cane. I've known Ruth since she was a girl dreaming of this place with her David. I've seen her through the worst heartache a person can bear, and I've seen her get up every single morning and bake the best damn bread in this city. She's more competent before her first cup of coffee than most people are all day. I'll tell that judge myself. Tears streamed down my face then, but they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of strength, drawn from the well of their belief in me. The third and strongest strand of the web was the evidence. Ben, the forensic accountant, had finished his work. He met with us, along with Eleanor and Maya, to present his findings. It's as we suspected, Ben said, adjusting his glasses. Michael's financial situation is dire, but we found the smoking gun. He slid a document across the table. It was an email, printed out, between Michael and Chloe. The date stamp was from 2 days after I had revoked his bank authority. Eleanor pointed to a highlighted section. "Read it," she said softly. I picked up the paper. Michael's words, in cold black and white, leaped out at me. "Chloe, don't worry. She's being stubborn, but she's old and she's scared. The LLC plan is on hold for now, but my lawyer says a guardianship is a faster, cleaner way to get control. Once the court names me conservator, I can liquidate the bakery and the house, pay off our debts, and we'll still have plenty left for the apartment and a fresh start. She'll just have to get used to the idea. It's for her own good, anyway. She can't handle that place forever." I read it once. Then again. The room seemed to shrink, the air turning to stone in my lungs. Faster, cleaner way to get control. Liquidate the bakery and the house. She'll just have to get used to the idea. It was all there, the premeditation. The cold-blooded intention to dismantle my life for his convenience. The utter lack of any genuine concern for me, masked by the hollow phrase, "It's for her own good." I put the paper down, my hand perfectly steady. The last tiny ember of hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, that some part of my son was still in there, flickered and died. There was no ambiguity left, no room for forgiveness. This was the truth. I looked at Eleanor. "Can we use this?" Her smile was a thing of terrible beauty. "It's a privileged communication between him and his fiancée. His lawyer will fight to keep it out. But the fact that it exists, it tells us everything we need to know. It's the blueprint of their entire scheme. We may not be able to show it to the judge directly, but we can use it to guide our questions. We can lead him right to the edge of this cliff and let him hang himself with his own words." The final preparation was the most intimate and the most painful. Eleanor wanted me to write to read to the judge at the end of the hearing, if the opportunity arose. "It can't be an emotional appeal," she instructed. "It must be a summation of the facts, from the heart. It's your chance to look the judge in the eye and tell her who you are, and who your son has become." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank notebook. I stared at the page for a long time. How could I possibly sum up a lifetime of love and a year of betrayal? I thought about the little boy in the flour-dusted bakery. I thought about the man who saw my life as a line item on a balance sheet. And then I began to write. I wrote about David. I wrote about the dream we shared. I wrote about the profound privilege and backbreaking work of raising a child alone while building a business. I didn't write about my pain. I wrote about my legacy. I wrote about what the rising dough meant, not as an asset, but as a testament to resilience, to community, to love made tangible in the form of bread. I wrote about the profound difference between caring for someone and controlling them. I wrote about how a true guardian protects a person's spirit, not just their property. When I finished, my hand was cramping and dawn was tinting the sky. I had filled 10 pages. It was raw, it was real, and it was, as Eleanor had demanded, a summation of the facts of my life. The day before the hearing, a registered letter arrived for me. It was from Michael's lawyer. It was a settlement offer. They proposed dropping the guardianship petition if I agreed to. 1. Immediately add Michael as a 50% owner of the bakery. 2. Grant him power of attorney over my financial affairs. And 3. Begin a transition plan that would see me retiring within 6 months. I read it and actually laughed, a short bitter sound that echoed in my quiet kitchen. After everything, after the lies, the manipulation, the attempt to have me declared incompetent, he was still trying to negotiate a surrender. He still thought he could win. I took the letter, carried it to the sink, and lit a corner of it with a match from the stove. I held it as the flame licked up the page, consuming the arrogant words, until it threatened to burn my fingers. I dropped the blackened ashes into the sink and turned on the water, washing them down the drain. There would be no settlement. There would be no negotiation. The web was woven. Every strand was in place, My fortified testimony, my army of supporters, the damning financial evidence, the secret email that revealed their true hearts, and my own final words. I was the spider, sitting at the center of it all, and I was ready for the fly. The courthouse was a temple of echoes and anxiety, a place where the air itself felt heavy with the weight of broken promises and last-ditch hopes. The floors were polished to a cold, impersonal shine, and the sound of our footsteps as we walked down the long corridor to courtroom 4B seemed to announce our arrival like a drumbeat. I walked between Eleanor Vance and Clara, a fortress of tailored wool and steely resolve on either side of me. Eleanor carried a slim leather portfolio that contained the entire, meticulously constructed web of our defense. Clara's arm was linked through mine, not for support, but as a statement of unity. Behind us, a quiet procession followed Auntie Grace, Ben the accountant, and a dozen of my most stalwart supporters, including Mrs. Gable, who had insisted on coming despite the difficulty it caused her. We turned a corner, and there they were. Michael, Chloe, and their lawyer, a man named Robert Thorne. He was everything I expected, mid-50s, expensively suited, with a tan that spoke of golf courses and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Michael looked pale and tense, his jaw tight. He wouldn't meet my gaze. Chloe, in a severe, fashionable black dress, looked bored, as if this were a tedious corporate merger and not the systematic dismantling of a family. The two groups regarded each other from opposite ends of the hall, a no-man's land of worn linoleum between us. No one spoke. The silence was a physical presence, thick and hostile. Then, the courtroom doors opened. We filed in. The room was smaller than I'd imagined, all dark wood and green leather. It felt intimate and terrifying. We took our seats at the table on the left. They took the right. The gallery behind us filled with the soft rustle of my friends and neighbors settling in. I didn't turn to look, but I could feel their presence, a warm, solid wall at my back. The bailiff called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Irene Watkins." The judge who entered was a black woman in her 60s, with a cap of close-cropped silver hair and a face that looked as if it had seen every trick in the book and had written a few new ones herself. She moved with a quiet authority, her black robes whispering around her. She did not look like someone who would suffer fools gladly. "Be seated," she said, her voice calm and clear. She surveyed the room, her gaze lingering for a moment on the unusually full gallery, then on the faces of the legal teams. "We are here on the matter of the petition for guardianship and conservatorship of Ruth Miller. Counsel, are you ready to proceed?" "Ready for the petitioner, Your Honor," Thorne said, standing. "Ready for the respondent, Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice cool and crisp. "Mr. Thorne, you may call your first witness." Thorne stood. "The petitioner calls Michael Miller to the stand." My heart hammered against my ribs as my son walked the few steps to the witness stand, was sworn in, and sat down. He looked so young up there, so vulnerable under the harsh fluorescent lights. For a treacherous second, my maternal instinct screamed at me to protect him, to stop this, to make it all go away. Then I remembered the email. Faster, cleaner way to get control. Thorne began with soft, leading questions, painting a picture of a devoted son. Michael spoke about his childhood, about how much he loved me, how he only wanted what was best for me. He talked about my tireless work ethic and how he feared it was taking a toll. He was careful, rehearsed. He mentioned my resistance to his help and my increasing isolation, carefully using the language from the petition. It was all going according to their script. I kept my face a calm mask, my hands folded in my lap, but inside, I was screaming. Then it was Eleanor's turn for cross-examination. She stood slowly, smoothing her jacket. She didn't approach the stand immediately. She just stood there, letting the silence stretch, forcing everyone in the room to focus on her. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice conversational, almost friendly. "You say you are concerned about your mother's financial imprudence. Can you tell the court one specific, imprudent financial decision she has made in the last year?" Michael blinked, thrown by the specificity of the question. "Well, it's not one decision. It's a pattern." Her refusal to modernize. That's not a financial decision, that's a business strategy. Eleanor interrupted gently. Can you name one? A bad investment, an unnecessary luxury purchase, an unpaid bill. I can't think of one off the top of my head. He stammered. Let's try another area. You claim she is showing signs of cognitive decline. Have you taken her to a doctor? Spoken to her physician? No, but have you witnessed her forgetting to pay bills? Getting lost in her own neighborhood? Leaving the stove on? No, but she's been forgetful with orders at the bakery, he said, grasping at the straw Thorne had given him. Eleanor picked up a document from our table. I have here the bakery's internal order logs and customer complaint records for the past 5 years. The error rate has remained a consistent 0.5%. Can you point to any data, any objective evidence of this increased forgetfulness? Michael looked at Thorne, who gave a considered, slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. No, Michael said quietly. No, Eleanor repeated, letting the word hang in the air. She moved on, her tone still pleasant. You say you want to help her. When was the last time you actually worked a shift at the bakery? Got your hands dirty, so to speak? He shifted uncomfortably. It's been a while. I've been busy with other things. Other things. Eleanor echoed. Like planning your wedding, correct? A rather lavish wedding, I understand. Thorne was on his feet. Objection, relevance? Goes to the petitioner's motive and financial state, Your Honor, Eleanor said smoothly. I'll allow it, Judge Watkins said, her eyes keen with interest. Mr. Miller, Eleanor continued, is it true that you and your fiancé have put a non-refundable deposit on a luxury apartment at the Verve building? Michael's face flushed. Yes. And that purchase is contingent on you securing a mortgage? Yes. And to secure that mortgage, you need to show significant assets or income, correct? I suppose. Eleanor picked up another document from Ben. Mr. Miller, isn't it true that you are currently over $80,000 in credit card debt and have a personal loan of another $50,000? The gallery behind me let out a collective, muted gasp. Michael looked like a deer caught in headlights. He shot a panicked look at Thorne. Your Honor, this is a gross invasion of my client's privacy. Thorne blustered. The petitioner has put his mother's financial competence at issue, Eleanor retorted, her voice sharpening for the first time. It is highly relevant to explore whether his own financial distress is the true motive behind this petition. I have the bank records right here, Your Honor. Judge Watkins nodded. The objection is overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Miller. Michael's shoulders slumped. Yes, he whispered. Yes, Eleanor said, her voice ringing with clarity. So, you are deeply in debt, unable to qualify for the mortgage on the home you want, and your solution to this financial crisis is to have your mother declared incompetent so you can gain control of her assets, including her highly profitable business and her debt-free home, which you could then liquidate to solve your problems. Is that not the case? It's not like that. Michael burst out, his composure shattering. I love my mother. This is for her own good. She's stubborn, she doesn't understand. What doesn't she understand, Michael? I didn't realize I had spoken until the words were out of my mouth. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. Everyone turned to look at me. Eleanor gave me a barely perceptible nod. Michael stared at me, his eyes wide with shock and something else, guilt. Fury. I stood up, slowly. I wasn't supposed to, but I couldn't stay seated. What is it that I'm too old and too stubborn to understand? That my son sees my life's work as a pile of money to be spent? That my home is just a piece of real estate? That the love I poured into you for 25 years has a price tag on it, and it's exactly $80,000 plus a luxury apartment? The courtroom was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Mom, he whispered, his face a mask of anguish. Don't, I said, my voice trembling with a pain I could no longer contain. Don't you mom me. You stood in my kitchen and called your father's favorite cake a liability. You sat in my living room and plotted to sell my home out from under me. You filed papers telling a judge I am losing my mind. So, tell me, Michael, what is it that I don't understand? He had no answer. He just looked down at his hands, defeated. Eleanor, seeing the moment was perfect, stepped in. Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness. The rest of the hearing was a formality. Thorne, flustered and off balance, called Chloe to the stand, but her cold corporate answers about brand equity and optimization only served to alienate the judge further. When Eleanor cross-examined her, pointing out that she had never actually worked a day in the bakery, she was so eager to redesign, Chloe's facade of bored sophistication cracked, revealing a core of pure, unadulterated avarice. Then, Eleanor called our witnesses. Dr. Evans was brilliant and definitive. Ben the accountant was dry and devastating. And then, one by one, my friends and neighbors took the stand. Mrs. Gable, her voice shaking with age but firm with conviction, told the judge about the time I delivered bread to her house in a blizzard when she was sick. The mailman described how I always had a cold drink for him in the summer. They painted a picture, not of a declining, isolated woman, but of a pillar of a community, sharp, generous, and fully engaged with life. Finally, Eleanor stood. Your Honor, the respondent rests. But before you rule, Mrs. Miller has a brief statement she would like to read. Judge Watkins nodded. Proceed. I stood, the pages of my statement trembling in my hands. I looked not at Michael, not at Thorne, or Chloe, but directly at Judge Watkins. Your Honor, I began, my voice finding its strength. For 30 years, I have been a baker. I have learned that the most important ingredient in any recipe is not the flour or the yeast, but time. Time to let the dough rest. Time to let the flavors develop. Time to let something grow into what it was always meant to be. I took a breath. I have also been a mother. And I applied the same principle. I gave my son time and love and everything I had, hoping he would grow into the man I knew he could be. I paused, gathering myself. What I have learned through this painful process is that you cannot control what another person becomes. You can only control the boundaries you set for your own life. My bakery, the Rising Dough, is not just a business. It is a living chronicle of my family. It is the smell of my husband's dream and the sound of my son's laughter. It is my sanctuary and my fortress. To suggest that I am not competent to care for it is to suggest I am not competent to care for my own memories, my own heart. I looked down at my notes, then back up, my eyes clear. I do not need a guardian, Your Honor. I have been guarding my own life, and the legacy of the family I built, for a very long time. And I am very, very good at it. I sat down. The room was silent for a long moment. Judge Watkins looked from me, to Michael, to the packed gallery. She cleared her throat. This court has heard a great deal today, she began, her voice measured. We have heard claims of cognitive decline, which have been soundly refuted by expert testimony. We have heard claims of financial imprudence, which have been contradicted by 3 decades of exemplary financial records. What we have seen, in fact, is a picture of a remarkably capable, resilient, and deeply connected woman. She turned her gaze to Michael. Mr. Miller, what we have seen from you is a picture of profound financial distress and a shocking sense of entitlement. You have not presented a single piece of credible evidence that your mother is anything but fully competent. What you have presented is evidence that you see her as a solution to your own poor financial choices. She picked up her gavel. The petition for guardianship and conservatorship is dismissed. With prejudice. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent room. Furthermore, given the spurious and malicious nature of this filing, I am ordering you, Mr. Miller, to pay all of your mother's legal fees and court costs. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell a second time. It was over. A wave of sound erupted behind me, sighs of relief, quiet sobs, the rustle of people embracing. Clara put a firm hand on my shoulder. Grace was weeping openly, dabbing her eyes with a brightly colored scarf. I looked across the room. Michael was staring straight ahead, his face a blank, mask of shock. Chloe was already gathering her things, her mouth set in a thin, angry line. She didn't look at him. As we filed out of the courtroom, my supporters surrounding me like a jubilant, protective phalanx, I felt a hand on my arm. I turned. It was Michael. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. "Mom," he choked out. I'm sorry. It got out of hand." I looked at my son. The little boy was gone. The manipulative stranger from the hearing was gone, too. In his place was just a young man who had made a cataclysmic error in judgment, who had gambled everything and lost. The love I felt in that moment was not warm. It was sad, and distant, and weary. "I know you're sorry, Michael," I said quietly, my voice devoid of anger, but also of comfort. "But sorry doesn't put the pieces back together. You tried to break me, and you failed." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the echoing hall. The victory was complete. The web had held. But as I stepped out of the courthouse and into the weak afternoon sun, I felt no triumph. Only the vast, hollow quiet of a battle ended, and the daunting realization that I now had to build a new life in the ruins of the old one. Victory, I discovered, is a hollow room. The echoes of the gavel faded, the congratulations from my friends and neighbors were spoken, and then I was left alone in my quiet house with the ghost of what I had lost. I had won the war, but the battlefield was my family, and the landscape was scorched earth. The relief was there, a solid, undeniable fact, but it was ringed by a moat of grief so wide and so deep I couldn't see the other side. The first few days were the strangest. I would catch myself listening for the sound of Michael's car in the driveway, for the phone to ring with his number on the screen. The habits of a lifetime don't break easily. They just atrophy, slowly and painfully. The silence in the house was no longer a comfort, it was an accusation. Every corner held a memory that had been tainted, turned into evidence in a case I never wanted to be part of. I threw myself into the bakery with a ferocity that worried even Clara. I was there before 2 a.m. I left long after dark. I developed new, complicated recipes that required intense, concentration laminated pastries with 100 delicate layers, elaborately decorated cakes that were more architecture than dessert. I needed the physical exhaustion. I needed to be so tired that when my head hit the pillow, there was no room for thought, only for the blessed void of sleep. A week after the hearing, Grace and Clara staged an intervention. They showed up at the bakery after closing, armed with a bottle of good red wine and a determination that brooked no argument. "That's enough, Ruth," Clara said, taking the mixing bowl from my hands. "You're going to work yourself into the ground. But the brioche can wait," Grace said, already pouring 3 generous glasses. "You, my dear, cannot. You're running from ghosts, and you're going to trip and fall right into a vat of your own sourdough starter." They herded me to the little bistro table in the corner of the shop, the one where David and I used to have our coffee and plan our days. I slumped into a chair, the fight gone out of me. The truth was, I was exhausted. "We're worried about you," Grace said softly, pushing a glass toward me. "I'm fine," I said, the automatic response feeling flimsy and false. "You're not fine," Clara stated, never one for subtlety. "You won a brutal legal battle against your only child. No one is fine after that. You're allowed to not be fine." Tears, the ones I had been stubbornly baking into my bread, finally welled up. "What do I do now, Clara?" I whispered, the question a raw wound. "How do I be a mother after this? Is there a manual for that? How to navigate your life after your son tries to have you declared incompetent?" Grace reached over and covered my hand with hers. "You be a mother to yourself first, honey. You tend to the woman who just went through hell. The rest will figure itself out in time." "But he's my son," I said, the old, broken record playing in my heart. "And he's a grown man who made monstrous choices," Clara said, her voice firm but not unkind. "You holding yourself hostage to that fact won't change what he did. It will only destroy you. The best thing you can do for him, as strange as it sounds, is to live your life so fully, so joyfully that he is forced to see the magnitude of what he was willing to destroy. That is the only lesson that might, one day, sink in. We sat in silence for a while, sipping the wine. The warm, fruity liquid was a comfort. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a soft glow on the quiet street. "It's the silence I can't stand," I admitted finally. "The not knowing. Is he okay? Is he drowning in that debt? Has Chloe left him? I hate that I still care." "Of course you care," Grace sighed. "That's what makes you his mother. But caring from a distance is not the same as setting yourself on fire to keep him warm. You've already done that, and look what it got you." Her words struck a chord. She was right. My entire life had been about providing warmth, safety, stability for Michael. And in the end, he had tried to burn my house down for the insurance money. A few days later, the first ember of my new life glowed in the darkness. It came in the form of a letter, but not from Michael. It was from the lawyer, Robert Thorne. It was brief and to the point. He was withdrawing as Michael's counsel. The reason was stated in cold, legal language: irreconcilable differences and non-payment of outstanding fees. So, the financial house of cards had finally collapsed. Thorne, the expensive hired gun, had cut his losses. I felt a grim satisfaction, followed immediately by a pang of anxiety. Michael was now alone, with no lawyer and, I had to assume, no fiancé. The consequences of his actions were raining down, and a part of me, the mother, ached for the pain he must be in. But I did nothing. I followed Clara's advice. I tended to myself. I started small. I bought a new, ridiculously expensive throw pillow for my reading chair, just because I liked the color. I started leaving the bakery at a reasonable hour, trusting my capable staff to handle the closing. I even, on a whim, signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for, always putting the bakery, or Michael's needs, first. The first class was a disaster. My apples looked like lopsided potatoes, and my sky was a muddy gray. But I laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in months. It felt foreign and wonderful on my tongue. Then another ember. A reporter from the local business journal called. She'd heard about the case. It was, unfortunately, a matter of public record, and she wanted to do a profile on me. Not about the scandal, but about the bakery. About a woman who had built a 30-year legacy and successfully fought to keep it. I was wary, but Eleanor Vance advised me to do it. "Control the narrative, Ruth. You are a success story, not a victim. Let them see that." So, I agreed. The reporter, a sharp young woman named Lisa, spent a day at the bakery. She watched me work, she talked to my customers, she ate a truly obscene number of croissants. The article came out the following week with the headline, "The Unbreakable Rise of the Rising Dough, How Ruth Miller Baked Her Way Through Betrayal." It was a beautiful piece. It focused on the business, the community, the recipes. It mentioned the legal battle only as a footnote, a storm that had failed to topple a stalwart oak. The day it was published, we were swamped. Not with gawkers, but with new customers. People who had read the article and wanted to support me, to be part of the story of resilience. It was overwhelming and beautiful. And then, the final, most surprising ember appeared. It was a Saturday afternoon, the bakery buzzing with the post-article crowd. I was at the register, ringing up a line of customers, when I looked up and saw him. He was standing, just inside the door, looking lost and out of place. He had lost weight. His clothes, usually so crisp, were rumpled. He looked like a photograph that had been left out in the rain, the colors blurred and faded. It was Michael. My breath caught in my throat. The chatter in the bakery seemed to dim. I finished with my customer on autopilot, my heart hammering against my ribs. He didn't approach the counter. He just stood there, his hands shoved in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the floor. He looked like the little boy who had come to tell me he'd broken a window with a baseball, terrified of the consequences. I felt every eye in the place on us. The air was thick with unspoken questions. I took a deep breath. Clara's words echoed in my mind. Live your life so fully that he is forced to see the magnitude of what he was willing to destroy. I turned to Sarah, my head baker. Sarah, can you take the register for a moment? Of course, Ruth, she said, her eyes wide with concern. I walked out from behind the counter. The crowd parted for me. I stopped a few feet from Michael. He finally looked up. His eyes were haunted, shadowed with a pain I recognized all too well. Mom, he said, and his voice was a ragged whisper. I didn't know where else to go. He didn't ask for money. He didn't make excuses. He just stood there, broken. The mother in me wanted to gather him in my arms, to tell him it was all going to be okay. The woman who had survived his betrayal stood her ground. This will always be your home, Michael, I said, my voice quiet but clear, carrying in the hushed bakery. But you are a guest here now, you understand the difference. He flinched as if I'd struck him, but he nodded, a single, jerky movement, yes. I looked at him for a long moment, this stranger who was my son. The ashes of our old relationship were all around us. But in his brokenness, I saw not a monster, but a fool, a terribly, tragically foolish young man who had been led astray by greed and had lost everything because of it. I'm making a pot of tea, I said finally. You can come to the back and have a cup if you like. But we are not going to talk about the case. We are not going to talk about money. We are not going to talk about Chloe. Is that understood? He looked at me, and for a flicker of a second, I saw a glimpse of the boy he had been humbled, chastened, and deeply grateful. Understood, he whispered. I turned and walked toward the kitchen, not checking to see if he was following. I was setting a boundary, the first of many we would have to navigate if there was ever to be a path forward. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was a cup of tea in the ashes, a small, fragile ember of something that was not yet hope, but was no longer hatred. And for now, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, that was enough. The walk from the front of the bakery to the back office felt like the longest journey of my life. Every step was measured, deliberate. I was hyper-aware of the silence that had fallen over the shop, of the eyes watching our procession, the victorious mother and the prodigal son, walking not in reunion, but in a fragile, armed truce. I didn't look back. I either had to trust that he would follow, or be prepared for the hollow victory of him turning and walking away. Both possibilities filled me with a different kind of dread. I heard his footsteps behind me, hesitant but steady. The kitchen staff, who had been chattering and clattering, fell silent as we passed through. I saw the looks on their faces: curiosity, protectiveness, judgment. They were my family too, and they had borne witness to the toll Michael's war had taken on me. I gave a small, almost imperceptible, shake of my head. Stand down. This was my battle to navigate now. I pushed open the door to my small, cluttered office. The familiar chaos was a comfort: invoices pinned to a corkboard, recipe books stacked precariously on a shelf, the faint, permanent smell of yeast and sugar that had seeped into the very walls. I gestured to the worn armchair in the corner, the one David had always claimed. Sit. He did, folding his long frame into the chair as if he were afraid it might break under him. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on a faded photo of the three of us. David, me, and a 6-year-old Michael, covered in flour, grinning from ear to ear that was tucked into the edge of the corkboard. He quickly looked away, his throat working. I busied myself with the small electric kettle on the filing cabinet, measuring loose-leaf Earl Grey into 2 mugs. The simple, ritualistic actions: boiling the water, steeping the tea, gave my hands something to do, and my mind a focal point beyond the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I did not speak, neither did he. The only sounds were the hum of the kettle, the distant murmur from the bakery, and the ragged sound of his breathing. When the tea was ready, I handed him a mug. Our fingers didn't touch. I took my own mug and sat in my swivel chair behind the desk, putting the physical barrier of wood and laminate between us. It was a conscious choice. I was not his comforter. I was the keeper of my own peace, and he was a petitioner at the gates. He cradled the mug in his hands, staring into the steaming, amber liquid as if it held all the answers. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough. "Chloe left me." The words hung in the air. I said nothing. I took a sip of my tea, the bergamot sharp and bracing on my tongue. "The day after the hearing," he continued, when it became clear I wouldn't respond. "She packed her things, said I was a liability, that my failure to manage the situation had embarrassed her family." He let out a short, bitter laugh that was more like a cough. "She used the same word. Liability." I remained silent. I would not give him the satisfaction of my sympathy. Not for this. He had chosen his ally, and she had shown her true colors. That was his lesson to learn, not my burden to share. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "I get it now, Mom. I see what she was. What I became with her. Don't," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Don't you dare lay this all at her feet. She may have handed you the blueprint, Michael, but you were the one who picked up the hammer. You signed those papers. You stood in that courtroom and lied about me. You." I pointed a finger at him, my hand steady. "The choice was always yours." He flinched, his shoulders slumping further. He looked down again, defeated. "I know. God, I know." He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I'm so sorry, Mom. The things I said. The things I did. I don't even recognize myself." The apology, when it finally came, was not the balm I once thought it would be. It was just words. Hollowed-out shells of syllables that couldn't rebuild what had been shattered. "Sorry is a small word for a very big thing, Michael," I said, my tone not unkind, but distant. "It doesn't magically erase the petition, or the things you said about my mind failing, or the fact that you saw my life as a piggy bank to be smashed open." "I was scared," he whispered. And for the first time, I heard the genuine, childish terror underneath the grown man regret. I was in so deep, Mom, the debt. It was like quicksand. Every month, it was pulling me under. And Chloe, she had this vision for our life, this shiny, perfect future, and I was so desperate to give it to her, to be the man she wanted. I thought if I could just get control, just fix everything, it would all be okay. "By destroying me to save yourself," I stated, finishing the thought he couldn't. He didn't deny it. He just nodded, a single, miserable dip of his head. We sat in silence again. I finished my tea. He left his, untouched, growing cold. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice small. "Now?" I set my mug down with a definitive click. "Now, you go and you live with the consequences of your choices. You find a job, a real one, not a scheme. You make a budget. You start penny by painful penny to dig yourself out of the hole you made. That is what happens now." He looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. You're not going to help me?" It was the question I had been waiting for, the test. "No, Michael," I said, and my voice was as firm as the earth. "I am not. Helping you before meant enabling you. It meant letting you believe that your problems were mine to solve. I will not do that anymore. My help, from now on, will look like this." I gestured between us. A cup of tea, a place to sit. But not a check, not a signature, not a rescue. "You are 25 years old. It is time for you to learn how to save yourself." The hope that had briefly kindled in his eyes died. He looked crushed. And a part of me, the old, soft part, ached to take it back, to tell him it would be all right, that Mommy would make it better. But I smothered that part. It was the part that had almost cost me everything. He stood up slowly, as if the weight of the world were on his shoulders. "Okay," he said, the word barely audible. "I understand." He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the knob. He didn't turn around. "The bakery, it smells the same. It still feels like home. It is my home," I said softly. "And you are welcome in it, as a guest, when you can come with respect." He gave another jerky nod, then opened the door and slipped out. I sat there for a long time after he left, listening to the sounds of the bakery returning to normal. The murmur of voices, the clang of a sheet pan, the cheerful ring of the register. Life was going on. My life. Auntie Grace appeared in the doorway, her face etched with concern. "Ruth, are you all right?" I looked at her, and to my surprise, I found that I was. I was not happy, I was not whole, but I was all right. The world had not ended, the ground had not swallowed me whole. I had faced my son, I had heard his apology, and I had held my line. I said, and I meant it. I just had a very difficult cup of tea. She came in and sat in the chair Michael had just vacated. She didn't ask for details. She just reached out and took my hand. "He looked broken," she said softly. "He is," I agreed. "But I didn't break him, Grace, he broke himself. My job isn't to put the pieces back together. My job is to make sure he doesn't use those broken pieces to cut me ever again." Grace squeezed my hand. "My dear Ruth," she whispered, her eyes shining with pride and sorrow, "when did you get so wise?" "I had excellent teachers," I said, thinking of Clara's unflinching clarity and Eleanor's strategic genius. And I thought of David, whose love had built the foundation that had, against all odds, held. The encounter left me emotionally drained, but also strangely lighter. I had spoken my truth. I had set my terms. The power was no longer in the drama of the conflict, but in the quiet, daily practice of my boundaries. A few days later, I was in my painting class, attempting to capture the melancholic beauty of a wilting sunflower. My brush strokes were clumsy, but I was absorbed, focused on the play of light and shadow on the drooping petals. My phone, set to silent, buzzed in my bag. I ignored it. This time was for me. When class was over, I checked my phone. There was a single text message from an unknown number, but I knew who it was from. "I got a job. It's loading trucks at a warehouse. The hours are terrible and my back hurts. But it's a job." I read the message twice. There was no request for pity, no ask for help. It was just a statement. A report from the front lines of his consequences. I didn't reply immediately. I drove home, made myself dinner, and thought about it. This was the new territory. This was what a cup of tea looked like in the digital age. A simple, unadorned fact. An acknowledgement that he was doing what I had said he must do. Later that evening, I picked up my phone. I typed out a message, deleted it, typed another. I settled on something simple, something that was neither endorsement nor condemnation. It was just an acknowledgement of receipt. "I see." I pressed send. It was not an open door, it was a keyhole. A tiny, narrow aperture through which a sliver of light might, one day, pass. It was enough for now. The tea had been poured. The first, most difficult sip had been taken. The rest, I knew, would be steeped in time. The text message hung in the digital air between us, a single, unadorned fact: "I got a job." And my response, equally bare: "I see." It was not the stuff of dramatic reconciliation. It was the quiet, granular work of building a new landscape, one pebble of reality at a time. He was telling me he was doing the hard thing. I was acknowledging I'd hurt him. That was the entire transaction. And for now, it had to be enough. Life, in its stubborn, persistent way, began to find a new rhythm. The notoriety from the newspaper article faded, but it left behind a solid core of new, loyal customers. The bakery was thriving in a way it never had before, its success now tinged with a hard-won symbolism. I was no longer just the nice lady who made good scones. I was Ruth Miller, the woman who wouldn't be broken. People came for the bread, but I think some of them also came for a glimpse of that unbreakable spirit, to draw a little strength from it for their own battles. I continued with my painting classes. My sunflowers stopped looking quite so much like defeated sea anemones and began to capture a sense of dignified, golden age beauty. I even framed one and hung it in the bakery office, right next to the old family photo. It felt like a statement. See, new things can grow here too. The texts from Michael became a sporadic, unpredictable thread in the tapestry of my weeks. They were never emotional, they were dispatches. Paid off the first credit card, the one with the 29% April. Found a cheaper studio apartment. It's above a laundromat. It's loud. They made me a shift supervisor. It's a 50-cent raise. I never knew how to respond. A congratulations felt wildly inappropriate, given the context. A "that's nice" was condescending. So I settled on a policy of simple factual acknowledgement. Noted. Understood. I see. It was a strange, stilted dialogue, but it was a dialogue. He was proving his mettle not with words, but with action. And I was witnessing it, from a safe, fortified distance. It was Clara who pointed out the shift. She was helping me inventory baking supplies one afternoon, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "He's stopped asking, hasn't he?" she said, not looking up from her clipboard. "Asking for what?" "For anything. For money, for sympathy, for a shortcut. He's just reporting in." I paused, a bag of bread flour in my arms. "I suppose he is." "Good," she said, making a check mark on her list. That's the first sign of real change. When they stop trying to manipulate the situation and start just dealing with it. It doesn't mean he's a saint. It just means he's finally acting like an adult. An adult? The word was so simple, yet it described a chasm Michael had yet to cross for so long. He was finally doing the grunt work of adulthood. The unglamorous jobs, the bill-paying, the living within one's means. It was the foundation upon which character is built, and his had been all facade. Then, about 2 months after the hearing, the whispers started. It was Grace who heard it first, of course. The community center was a better news hub than any television network. She came into the bakery, her eyes wide, and pulled me aside. "You will not believe what Brenda Higgins told me," she whispered, though the shop was empty. "It's about Chloe." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "What about her?" "She's engaged," Grace said, her voice a mixture of outrage and grim satisfaction. "To that yoga instructor. The one who can't touch his toes. Apparently, her family set it up, some kind of merger with his family's chain of wellness spas. It's all very transactional." I leaned against the counter, the news washing over me. It was no surprise. Chloe was a creature of strategy, not sentiment. Michael had been a failed investment. She had simply cut her losses and moved on to a more promising portfolio. The cold, business-like efficiency of it was breathtaking. "Well," I said, my voice flat, "I hope they're very happy together." "But Ruth, don't you see?" Grace pressed. "It proves it. It proves she never loved him. She was just using him to get to you, to the bakery." "I knew that, Grace," I said softly. "The courtroom proved that. This is just the public announcement." The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. I saw the looks of pity people now gave when Michael's name was mentioned. That poor boy, led astray by that gold digger. The narrative was shifting, he was being reframed from villain to victim, and I found I hated it almost as much. It was a Thursday evening, and I was closing up alone, enjoying the quiet ritual of wiping down the counters and mopping the floors. The bell on the door jingled. I looked up, and my heart stuttered. It was Michael. He stood there, still in his work clothes, sturdy boots, dark jeans, a shirt with a logo for the shipping company. He looked older. The softness of his youth had been planed away by physical labor and stress, leaving behind harder lines. But his eyes, they were clear, and they were full of a raw, unvarnished pain. "Mom," he said, his voice rough. Can we talk?" I leaned the mop against the wall. "I suppose you've heard the news." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah. Everyone's heard. My boss at the warehouse heard." He clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Better off without her, kid. It's humiliating." "Is that why you're here?" I asked, crossing my arms. "For sympathy?" "No," he said, and the word was like a gunshot in the quiet shop. "No, I'm not. I'm here because I need you to know that I know." He took a step forward, his hands clenched at his sides. I know people are feeling sorry for me now. I know they're saying she was the villain and I was just her dumb, lovesick puppet. And that's a lie, too. I stayed silent, watching him. I wasn't a puppet, Mom, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. I was a willing partner. I liked the life she promised. I liked the idea of being that guy, the successful guy with the beautiful wife and the fancy apartment. I wanted it. I wanted it so bad I was willing to sell my soul, and yours, to get it. She didn't twist my arm. She just showed me a door, and I was the one who chose to kick it down. The roar of his confession filled the bakery. It was the truth I had been waiting to hear. Not an excuse, not a deflection of blame, but a full-throated admission of his own complicity. He was reclaiming his agency, even in his failure. Tears were streaming down his face now, but he didn't try to hide them. I am so sorry, Mom. Not because I got caught, not because I lost her. I'm sorry for the person I chose to be. I'm sorry for betraying you. I'm sorry for betraying Dad. I'm sorry for betraying the boy who grew up in this bakery. I failed all of you. He stood there, weeping openly in the middle of the shop, surrounded by the ghosts of his childhood. The arrogant stranger was gone. The broken supplicant was gone. In his place was just a man, finally tall enough to see the full, devastating scope of his mistakes. I didn't go to him. I didn't offer comfort. But the fortress around my heart, brick by painful brick, began to tremble. Why now, Michael? I asked, my own voice thick. Why are you telling me this now? Because I can't live with the whispers, he said, wiping his face with the back of his hand. I can't let people think I'm just a victim. I have to own this, all of it. If I'm ever going to be able to look at myself in the mirror again, I have to start by telling you the whole ugly truth. I was greedy. I was arrogant. I was a terrible son. And I have to spend the rest of my life trying to be better. He looked at me then, his gaze clear and steady through his tears. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve that, but I needed you to hear it from me. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It wasn't hostile or tense. It was spacious. It was a silence that could hold the weight of his confession and my grief. I walked over to the display case, my movements slow and deliberate. I took out 2 of the day's last almond croissants, placed them on a plate, and set it on one of the small bistro tables. Sit down, Michael, I said. He looked at the table, then at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Sit, I repeated. He obeyed, sinking into the chair as if his legs could no longer hold him. I sat across from him. I pushed the plate toward him. Eat, I said. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks. He looked at the croissant, then back at me, and a fresh wave of tears welled in his eyes. This small, maternal act, the offering of food, was somehow more profound than any words of forgiveness could ever be. It was an acknowledgement of his humanity, even in his failure. He picked up the croissant, his hands trembling, and took a bite. He chewed slowly, and I saw him close his eyes for a second. The familiar taste, the taste of his childhood, of home, washing over him. We sat there, in the quiet bakery, not as mother and son reconciled, but as 2 wounded people sharing a plate of pastries in the aftermath of a storm. The whispers of the town outside didn't matter. The roar of his confession had faded, leaving behind a quiet, raw truth. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an ending to the war. And in the fragile, flower-dusted silence, the long, difficult work of peace could finally begin. Peace, I was learning, was not a destination you arrived at, but a climate you had to cultivate daily. It was fragile, like a sourdough starter that needed to be fed and tended, susceptible to the cold drafts of old hurts and the sour tang of remembered betrayals. The encounter in the bakery after Chloe's engagement had opened a new, tentative channel between Michael and me, but it was a channel that ran with clear, cold water, not the warm, muddy river of our old enmeshment. He started coming by the bakery on occasional Sunday afternoons, always after the morning rush had subsided, always when I was likely to be in the back office doing paperwork. He never came empty-handed. It was never anything grand, a 6-pack of my favorite ginger ale, a book he thought I might like, a quirky, handmade spatula he'd found at a flea market. They were peace offerings, but not the expensive, guilt-laden kind from before. These were thoughtful. They said, "I am paying attention." He would sit in the worn armchair, and we would talk. Not about the past, not about the lawsuit, not about money. We talked about his job. He told me about the characters at the warehouse, about the mind-numbing monotony of loading trucks that somehow, paradoxically, had given his mind space to clear. We talked about books, about the city's terrible baseball team, about the weird weather. It was small talk, the kind you make with a pleasant acquaintance. And for now, that was a monumental achievement. One such Sunday, he found me up to my elbows in a different kind of dough, the quarterly tax estimates. Spreadsheets were scattered across my desk, my calculator humming, a deep furrow of concentration etched between my brows. He stood in the doorway, holding a bag of my favorite coffee beans. "Bad time?" I looked up, pushing my reading glasses onto my head. "Just wrestling with the tax man. He's a relentless foe." He hovered uncertainly. I could come back." "No, it's fine," I said, and found that I meant it. "Sit, this is a good distraction." He sat, placing the coffee beans on the corner of the desk. His eyes scanned the organized chaos of my paperwork. "It looks complicated." "It's just math," I said with a sigh. A story told in numbers. A very boring story about flour and sugar. He was quiet for a moment, watching me. "You always made it look easy. I never really thought about all this." He gestured at the spreadsheets. "Most people don't," I said. "They just see the warm, smiling baker with the fresh bread. They don't see the 3 a.m. alarms, the supplier invoices, the repair bills for the oven, the payroll taxes. They don't see the ledger behind the loaf. The ledger behind the loaf." The phrase hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. We both knew we weren't just talking about the bakery's finances anymore. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Would you show me?" I looked at him, surprised. "Show you what?" "The ledger, the business, the real story." He met my gaze, his expression earnest, devoid of its old calculating glint. "Not because I want anything. Just because I think I should understand it. I think I should know what it really takes." This was new territory. This was him asking to see the engine room, not to take control of the ship, but simply to appreciate the machinery. It was a request born of respect, not avarice. My first instinct was to say no, to protect my fortress. But Clara's voice echoed in my mind. "You have to let him prove he can be trusted with small things before you can even think about big things." I took a slow breath. "All right," I said, my voice neutral. I slid a copy of the profit and loss statement across the desk. "This is the profit and loss from last quarter. It tells the story of what we earned and what we spent." He picked it up, his brow furrowed in concentration. He asked questions. Simple, intelligent questions. "Why is the cost of butter so high this quarter? What's this line for professional services? The revenue from the baking classes has gone up that much." I found myself explaining, not defensively, but as a teacher to a student. I showed him how a spike in the price of vanilla in Madagascar could affect my bottom line. I explained how the new, energy-efficient light bulbs I'd installed had lowered the utilities cost. I walked him through the investment in the new point-of-sale system and how it was saving Sarah hours of manual work each week. He listened, truly listened. He didn't offer unsolicited advice. He didn't tell me how to run things better. He just absorbed the complex, interlocking reality of the business he had once seen as a simple asset to be liquidated. "It's a lot," he said finally, setting the paper down. He looked around the small office, at the faded photo, at my lopsided painting, with a new, profound respect. "You built all this, you manage all this, and you still get up and bake the bread." "It's my life, Michael," I said softly. "Not a spreadsheet." He nodded, his eyes downcast. "I see that now, I really do." He was silent for a long moment. "The debt, my debt, it's almost gone. Another 2 months, maybe 3. "That's good," I said, and it was a simple, true statement. It is, he agreed. But paying it off, it's just the numbers part. It's the easy part. This. He tapped the profit and loss statement. This is the real work, the work that builds something. I was so focused on the number at the bottom of a page, I was willing to destroy the whole story to get it. It was the most insightful thing he had ever said to me. He was finally understanding the difference between price and value. A few weeks later, a crisis offered him a chance to prove his newfound understanding in action. It was a brutal, record-breaking heat wave. The kind of humid, oppressive heat that saps the will from everything, even yeast. The bakery's ancient air conditioning system, a beast I'd been nursing along for years, gave a final, gasping shudder and died. Completely. It was a catastrophe. On a Tuesday, at 10 a.m., the temperature inside the shop was already pushing 90 degrees. The buttercream on the cupcakes was sliding off like glaciers calving. The bread dough was overproofing into puddles of goo. My staff was miserable, fanning themselves with baking sheets. "We have to close, Ruth," Sarah said, her face flushed. "We'll lose the entire day's product." My heart sank. A day's lost revenue was bad enough, but the loss of the ingredients, the wasted labor, it was a significant hit. I was on the phone with HVAC companies, being told it would be a week before anyone could come out. A week. In a quiet moment of despair, I sent a text to the only person I could think of who understood mechanical things. A simple, factual dispatch, just like his. AC is dead, shop is closing for the week. Within 20 minutes, his truck pulled up outside. He came in, his work shirt already damp with sweat. He didn't offer empty sympathy. He went straight to the basement where the monstrous, rusted HVAC unit lived. He spent an hour down there, the sounds of clanking and muttered curses drifting up. He came back up, his face and hands smeared with grime. "It's the compressor," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's shot. Totally seized, there's no fixing it." The confirmation was a final blow. "I see. Well, thank you for looking. But," he said, holding up a finger, "I have an idea. I can't fix the central air, but I can get this place cool enough to save the product and maybe even stay open." Before I could ask what he meant, he was on his phone. An hour later, 2 of his buddies from the warehouse showed up, and together they hauled 3 massive, industrial-grade portable air conditioning units out of a van. They were the kind used to cool server rooms, loud and ungainly, but powerful. "Where did you get these?" I asked, astonished. "The warehouse had them in storage from the old office," he said, already directing his friends to place them strategically around the shop. "My boss said I could borrow them for a few days. It's not pretty, but it'll work." He spent the rest of the day with us, helping to position the units, running heavy-duty extension cords, sealing the gaps around the doors with weather stripping to keep the cool air in. He worked alongside my staff, hauling, lifting, sweating. He didn't try to take charge, he just asked, "What do you need?" And then he did it. By late afternoon, the bakery was still noisy, but it was a comfortable, workable 75 degrees. The buttercream firmed up, the dough behaved. We had saved the day. As his friends packed up to leave, I tried to offer Michael money for his help, for the favor he'd called in. He shook his head, a firm, final gesture. "No, Mom, this isn't a transaction." "Then what is it?" I asked, truly wanting to understand. He looked around the saved bakery, at the humming, ugly, beautiful machines that had rescued us. He looked at me. "It's a contribution," he said simply. "Just a small contribution to the ledger." He left then, covered in grime and sweat, a tired smile on his face. I stood in the middle of my bustling, cool bakery, the roar of the portable units filling my ears. He hadn't done it for forgiveness. He hadn't done it for praise. He had seen a problem within his skill set to mitigate, and he had quietly, efficiently, solved it. He had given me back a week of revenue, yes. But more than that, he had given me back a piece of my son. Not the little boy from the laundry basket, and not the arrogant stranger from the courtroom. This was someone new. someone who understood the value of the loaf, because he had finally taken a hard, honest look at the ledger. And in that complicated, unglamorous column of numbers and grit, he had found a way to make a deposit, not a withdrawal. The universe, I have found, has a peculiar sense of poetic justice. It doesn't always deliver it on our schedule, and its methods can be brutally indirect, but it keeps its own set of books, and eventually, the ledger must balance. The heat wave broke, the borrowed industrial air conditioners were returned, and a new, terrifyingly expensive HVAC system was installed, a necessary investment in the future of the rising dough. Life settled back into its new, cautious rhythm. Michael's contributions became a quiet, consistent thread. He fixed a wobbly table leg without being asked. He showed up one Saturday with a truck and helped me take a mountain of cardboard boxes to the recycling center. He was, piece by piece, rebuilding his place in the ecosystem of my life, not as its owner, but as a respectful inhabitant. And then, karma arrived. It didn't come with thunder and lightning. It arrived in a plain, legal-sized envelope, just like the one that had contained the guardianship papers. But this one was addressed to Michael, care of my bakery. He had given my address as his point of contact for some of his debt repayment plans. He came by to pick up his mail on a Tuesday evening, his face still smudged with the grime of the warehouse. He tore the envelope open, his eyes scanning the document. Inside, his face, usually so carefully composed in my presence, went slack with shock. Then, a strange, choked sound escaped his lips, part laugh, part sob. "What is it?" I asked, my guard instinctively going up. Had he been sued again? He handed me the paper, his hand trembling. It wasn't a lawsuit, it was a summons, but not for him. It was a subpoena. Michael David Miller was being ordered to testify as a material witness in a civil case. The State versus Crestview Holdings and associated individuals. Crestview Holdings? I said, the name meaning nothing to me. Chloe's father's company, Michael whispered, sinking into the armchair as if his bones had turned to water. The yoga instructor? His family's wellness spas. It was all a front. A Ponzi scheme. They were taking money from new investors to pay returns to old ones. The whole thing, it's collapsed. I read the subpoena more carefully. Chloe's father, her new fiancé, and several of their associates were facing a litany of charges: securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering. The state was alleging a massive, multi-million-dollar scheme that had fleeced hundreds of investors. Michael was being called to testify about his interactions with them, specifically regarding their business advice and their attempts to gain control of the rising dough. The prosecution believed he could provide crucial evidence of their methods and their intent. "They want me to testify against Chloe's family," he said, his voice hollow. Against her. The irony was so thick, so perfect, it was almost blasphemous. The hunters were now the hunted. The architects of a plan to loot my legacy were accused of looting on a grand scale. And the key witness, the one they had sought to manipulate and use, was the very son they had tried to turn into a weapon. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vindication. I felt a profound, weary sense of a circle closing. "What are you going to do?" I asked. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a kind of terrified clarity. "What can I do? I have to tell the truth, the whole, ugly truth, about how they talked about the bakery, about the pressure they put on me, about the LLC, the guardianship, all of it." He ran a hand over his face. My God, they were using me. Not just for the bakery, but as a practice run. A small-scale model of their whole operation. Isolate the asset, undermine the owner, seize control. He was seeing the full, horrifying picture now, and it was dismantling the last of his own self-deceptions. He hadn't been a partner in their ambitions. He had been their pawn, their test subject. The trial was a media sensation. The wellness cult Ponzi scheme, as the papers dubbed it, had all the elements of a juicy scandal: wealth, yoga, beautiful people, and ruined retirees. Michael was a minor character in the drama, but a pivotal one. The day he testified, I didn't go to the courthouse. I couldn't. I stayed at the bakery, kneading dough with a ferocious intensity, trying to pound my anxiety into the gluten. Grace and Clara stood sentry, keeping the customers away from me, bringing me cups of tea I forgot to drink. He showed up at the bakery that evening, after it was all over. He looked 10 years older. His testimony, he told us in a flat, exhausted voice, had been brutal. The prosecutor had walked him through every email, every conversation, every helpful suggestion from Chloe and her father. He had to admit his own greed, his own complicity, on the stand, under oath, in a room full of strangers and reporters. And Chloe? I asked, unable to stop myself. He gave a grim, humorless smile. She was there. She stared a hole through me the entire time. When I talked about how she called the bakery quaint and your cake a liability, I saw her flinch. It was the first real emotion I've ever seen on her face that wasn't avarice or contempt. He had held his line. He had told the truth, the whole, humiliating truth, about himself and about them. He had been their puppet, and on the witness stand, he had finally cut his own strings. The verdict came down a month later, guilty on all counts for Chloe's father and her fiancé. Their assets were frozen, to be liquidated and returned to the investors they had defrauded. The shiny, perfect future Chloe had sold Michael, the future he had been willing to betray me for, was not just gone, it had been exposed as a criminal fantasy, a house of cards built on other people's life savings. The final, karmic twist came a week after the verdict. It was a slow, drizzly afternoon. The bell on the door jingled, and I looked up from arranging shortbread cookies to see Chloe standing there. She was a ghost of her former self. The sleek blazers and perfect hair were gone. She wore a simple, cheap-looking raincoat, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her face, devoid of its usual makeup, was pale and drawn. The polish was gone, stripped away, leaving behind something raw and desperate. Her eyes scanned the bakery, and when they landed on me, they filled with a venom so pure it was almost impressive. "You," she spat, her voice low and shaking. I put down the tray of cookies and slowly wiped my hands on my apron. "Can I help you, Chloe?" "You must be so happy," she hissed, taking a step closer. "You and your son. You've ruined everything." I felt a calmness settle over me, a deep, unshakable certainty. "No one ruined your life but you and your family, Chloe. You built it on a foundation of lies. It was only a matter of time before it collapsed. We were building an empire," she snapped, her composure cracking. "And he was too weak to see it through. And you with your sentimental little shop, you stood in the way of progress." I almost felt sorry for her. She was so deeply indoctrinated in her own narrative of entitlement, that even now, standing in the ruins of her life, she couldn't see the truth. "This sentimental little shop," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "has outlasted your empire. It's built on something real. Flour, water, salt, yeast, hard work, honesty, love. Things you wouldn't recognize if they bit you." Her face contorted with rage. "My father is going to prison because of your son's testimony." "Your father is going to prison because he is a criminal," I corrected her, my tone flat. "Michael's testimony just helped the jury see what he was. Just like his actions helped me see what he was. Sometimes, it takes a cataclysm to reveal the truth." She stared at me, her chest heaving. The fight seemed to go out of her all at once, replaced by a hollowed-out despair. She had come for a confrontation, for a victory in a battle she had already lost, and I had refused to give it to her. "Get out of my bakery, Chloe," I said, not unkindly, but with a finality that brooked no argument. "And don't come back." She stood there for a moment longer, a solitary, ruined figure in the warm, fragrant shop that represented everything she had tried and failed to conquer. Then, without another word, she turned and left, the bell jingling cheerfully behind her as if ushering out a bad dream. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the scent of my bread, feeling the solid, familiar ground beneath my feet. Later that evening, I told Michael she had come. He was sitting in the office, sipping a cup of the coffee he brought me. He was silent for a moment, then he nodded. I'm not surprised. She never could accept responsibility. He looked at me. Are you okay? The question, so simple, so caring, from him to me, was a seismic shift. I am, I said. And I was. It's over now. Truly over. The reckoning had come, not from my hands but from the cold, impartial hand of the law and the inevitable consequences of a corrupt foundation. The betrayers had been exposed, and punished in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. The universe's ledger was balanced. Michael finished his coffee and stood to leave. At the door, he paused. Mom? That contribution, fixing the AC, I was wondering if maybe there are other ways I could contribute. Sometimes, on my days off, not running anything. Just washing pans, sweeping floors, the grunt work. He wasn't asking for a job, he wasn't asking for a title. He was asking for the privilege of doing the humblest work in the place he had once tried to steal. He was asking to kneel in the temple and scrub the floors. I looked at my son. The journey had been hell, for both of us. But he had walked through the fire, and he had emerged, scarred and humbled, but real. The floors are always dirty, Michael, I said, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like forever. And the pans don't wash themselves. You can start Sunday. He nodded, a look of profound gratitude and relief in his eyes. Okay. Sunday. He left, and I was alone. The war was over. The reckoning was complete. And in the quiet aftermath, a new, fragile, and honest peace had finally taken root. If you've stayed with me this long, through the heartache and the twists and turns of my story, then you're like Auntie Grace, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, or like Auntie Clara, standing by the window, listening intently even when you're looking away. You've become part of my circle, and to my circle, I always speak the truth. So here is my truth, the one I had to learn the hard way, carved into my bones with the sharp knife of betrayal. Love is not a blanket excuse for poor behavior. It just isn't. For too long, I hid behind the phrase, but he's my son. I used it to explain away the condescension, to justify the manipulation, to swallow the little insults and the grand sweeping plans for my life that were made without my consent. I told myself that a mother's love is unconditional, and in my mind, unconditional love meant unconditional acceptance. It meant turning a blind eye. But that's not love. That's self-destruction. The single most important lesson I learned, the one I want to burn into the heart of every mother, every father, every person who has ever loved someone enough to let themselves be diminished by them, is this. You must love yourself enough to set boundaries, even when it breaks your heart. And oh, it will break your heart. When I revoked Michael's access to the bank account, my heart shattered. When I hired my own lawyer to counter his, I felt like I was building my own prison. When I stood in that courtroom and looked at my boy, my Michael, and saw a stranger who saw me as an obstacle, I thought I would die from the pain of it. Setting those boundaries felt like the most unloving, unmotherly thing I could possibly do. But it was the only truly loving act I had left. For him and for me. By saying no, by drawing a line in the sand, I was refusing to participate in my own erasure. I was also, in a way I couldn't see then, throwing a lifeline to the son I raised. I was forcing him to confront the man he had become. I was telling him, the values I taught you, integrity, respect, hard work, kindness, they are not negotiable, not even for you, not even for me. It wasn't a punishment. It was a correction. It was me saying, this far and no further. So many of us, especially women, especially mothers, are taught to be accommodating, to be gentle, to keep the peace. We're taught that creating a fuss is unladylike, that protecting our own interests is selfish. That's a poisoned narrative. It's the story that keeps us trapped. Let me tell you what selfish really looks like. Selfish is a son demanding his mother's livelihood to fund his own vanity. Selfish is a child believing their parents' decades of sacrifice are simply a down payment on their own comfort. My act of self-preservation was not selfish, it was sacred. And the other side of that lesson is about money. We're told not to talk about it. It's crude. It's vulgar. But that silence is a weapon used against people like us. That silence is how they get you to sign things you don't understand. That silence is how they make you feel small for caring about the money you earned with your own sweat and blood. Do not be ashamed of your financial intelligence. Own it. If you built something, you have a right to understand its worth, down to the last penny. If you saved something, you have a right to decide where it goes. Get a lawyer you trust, not one your family recommends. Have a banker who knows your name. Read the documents, even if you need a magnifying glass and a dictionary. Ask the stupid questions. There are no stupid questions when it comes to your survival. Money is not the root of all evil, but it is the world's sharpest magnifying glass. It takes the hairline cracks in a relationship and turns them into canyons. Michael's desire for my money didn't create his lack of character, it revealed it. It showed me that somewhere along the way, he had forgotten the most important recipe of all, the one for being a good man, the one I thought I had taught him. That's the bitterest pill to swallow, isn't it? Wondering where you went wrong. I've spent countless hours in this quiet house, going over every memory, every decision. Should I have been softer, harder? Should I have given him more, less? Auntie Grace told me to stop. She said, "Ruth, you can't hold yourself responsible for the choices a grown man makes. You gave him love, you gave him roots, and you gave him wings. What he chose to do with them is his story, not your failure." She's right. We do the best we can with the light we have at the time. We love them, we teach them, we hope. And then we have to release them into the world and pray that the core of them is strong enough to withstand the pressures. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. My story with Michael isn't over. The door isn't locked. But it is closed for now. And I had to be the one to close it. The path to reconciliation, if there ever is one, can only be built on a foundation of mutual respect, and that respect had to start with me demanding it. So what now? Now, I live. I get up at 3 a.m. and I bake. I make Mrs. Gable's seeded rye, and I sell $2 cookies to the after-school kids. I sit with Auntie Grace, and we gossip about Brenda Higgins. I endure Auntie Clara's blunt assessments of my life with a grateful smile. The bakery is mine again. Wholly, completely, blessedly mine. The rising dough will never be Levanter. It will be what it always was, a place of warmth and community and love. A monument to David, a testament to my own strength. The pain is still there. It's a quiet ache, a familiar companion. I don't think it will ever fully leave me. You don't get over the betrayal of your child. You learn to carry the weight of it. You make room for it. And in making room for the pain, you surprisingly make room for a new, deeper kind of peace. A peace that comes from knowing, truly knowing, who you are and what you are worth. You are worth protecting. You are worth fighting for. Your legacy, whatever that may be, a bakery, a garden, a family name, a simple, honest life is yours and yours alone to steward. So, if you take one thing from my long, painful story, let it be this: love fiercely, with your whole heart, but build your fences strong and tall. And never, ever be afraid to stand at the gate and say, with a voice that does not tremble, "This is mine." You may not come in unless you come in with respect. That isn't hardness. That is the deepest, most powerful kind of love there is. Thank you for listening. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.